Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Met His Match in Mind Games? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Monoma walked the unfamiliar hall to his new class, room 2B. He was definitely proud of his classmates. They've been steadily improving, and while those Class A brats had been getting all the spotlight, Monoma knew that his class was doing exceptionally well too. The sign that marked room 2B leered at him from the end of the hall, and Monoma took a deep breath as he moved to open the door. He'd arrived about 10 minutes early, simply because it was the beginning of the year, and as much as people treated him like a problem child, he liked to be prepared. He'd found out recently that he was in the same seating position as that green-haired boy from 2A, which was depressing to say the least, but he wasn't going to let the comparison get to him. He expected to be the first to arrive, so when he swung the door open tiredly and came face to face with Vlad King and that Shinso guy from General Studies, he recovered his signature lazy smile at record speed. "What a pleasant surprise," he drawled, because really it was. Monoma recognized Shinso's potential and knew he would be joining the hero course this year. He had just figured he'd be in Class A with the rest of the emotionally stunted brats and his mentor. "Monoma, Shinso will be a part of Class 2B this year. As class representative, Kendo has already been made aware, but I expect you not to make his transition to the hero course any more troubling than it needs to be." Vlad King's gaze held a warning. He had clearly already used up his small amount of patience, so Monoma just scoffed at him. "Me, difficult? I have no idea why you would say such a thing," he responded to his teacher, before turning to meet tired purple eyes. "Shinso-kun, it's a pleasure to see you again. I can assure you that being in Class 2B will be a much more valuable experience than whatever 2A has to offer." He grinned widely at his new classmate, who just rolled his eyes in exasperation. "Whatever. Where will he be sitting, sensei? Unless my vision is misleading me, there are only 20 desks in this room. And will he be moving into the dorms? I don't think I saw him coming in with everyone else yesterday. Shinso-kun will be moving into his dorm after orientation today. As for seating, I sent Kendo-san to get another desk from the storage room a minute ago." Monoma just nodded, and when nobody made an attempt to speak, he turned away. "Well, don't mind me, I'll just be over here. Continue with whatever you were talking about." Shinso, the perpetually grumpy, "I'm not here to make friends," wet blanket, made no attempt to say anything, so Monoma clapped him on the shoulder as he walked past and felt his quirk pick up inside his mind. "Monoma!" Vlad King warned from his desk, already wise to Monoma's antics, so the blonde just shrugged as he delicately slid into his chair. "I have no idea why you could be so concerned about me, Vlad-sensei." Monoma pulled out his phone to check the photo of the class schedule that had been posted in the dorms the previous day. They had their first session reserved for assembly and whatever speech Vlad King has planned to say, and then English was their first class. Monoma checked the time, 7:53 a.m., and slouched into his seat just as Kendo entered the room with a desk and chair in her massive hands. "Where would you like me to put these, Vlad-sensei?" She hadn't noticed Monoma, or if she had then she hadn't reacted, which was frankly rude, so Monoma stood and went over to her. "Put it in the back row and move the seats so that they alternate, I guess. Shinso-kun will have to be student 21 in the class because your costumes are listed under your student numbers, so we can't change them." As Kendo went to move the desks, Monoma planted a hand on her shoulder, taking her quirk and using it to help her set out the new seating arrangement. "Thank you, Monoma-kun," she said, and he just waved her off and moved to his desk. Shinso sat at the last desk in the last row, 2 seats back and slightly to the right of Monoma's own. "I didn't take you for the type to help people. You know, ever." Shinso leaned conspiratorially forward over his desk and muttered to Monoma, obviously just trying to provoke him. "That's because I only help people who deserve it." Monoma didn't turn to look at Shinso, keeping his tone steady and without malice, and Shinso just laughed. "What, are the two of you dating or something?" Monoma almost laughed out loud. Oh, if only this guy knew how wrong he was. "No, I can just recognize a decent person when I see one. Shinso didn't continue the conversation as their classmates started to file into the room. Kendo, how was your break? Tetsuko-kun. It was okay, not much really happened, I just took some time to rest. Yeah, our first year was really hectic. The rest of the class seemed to just now notice Shinso, and they all crowded his desk. Are you joining our class, Shinsu-san? I always thought you would have been put in 2A with Aizawa-sensei. Shinso just grumbled through a response that Monoma couldn't hear from his desk, and Vlad King cleared his throat. The students all shuffled back to their seats and the class began. I'm sure you all remember Shinso from some of our joint training sessions last year. He will be joining Class B from now onward. He has a lot to catch up on, but I trust you will all make it as smooth a transition as possible. There were a few small murmurs of, yes, sensei, and they head to orientation. Just like the previous year, Class A wasn't present. The brats probably thought they were too good to come and meet the new first years, but Monoma was clearly a better person than that. His class was assigned to introduce themselves to both 1A and 1B because 2A was absent, and Monoma happily took the opportunity, standing at the front of the group alongside Kendo and Tetsu. The first years looked nervous, the two classes merging together and huddling in one part of the room, so Class 2B, the more honorable class of the second years, decided to approach them. Hey, you're the first years, right? How are you all doing? There are a few shouts, a few murmurs, and a few kids who just shifted on their spots. Kendo took a deep breath and stepped forward from the group. We're Class 2B in the Hero course. My name is Kendo Itsuka. We were asked to help you come socialize with your upperclassmen a bit. There was shuffling amongst the cluster of 15-year-olds, and one pushed their way to the front. Hi Kendo-san. I'm Hamada Akira. It's so nice to meet you guys. The girl bowed deeply and returned to her full height with a bright smile. She had ashy blonde hair that fell just past her shoulders in unruly curls, and piercing pink eyes. She looked around the group for a moment, and her eyes fall on Monoma. The girl made a noise of recognition and moved toward him. Monoma-senpai. Oh my god, it's so cool to meet you, you're an inspiration. Monoma stepped back out of shock, eyeing the girl suspiciously for a moment. Was she kidding? Monoma didn't realize people even knew who he was. Really? He sounded like some kind of hopeful child, but he honestly couldn't believe this was happening. Yeah. My quirk is a bit stupid. I can just intercept other people's attacks and use them for myself. Like if someone tried to punch me, I could take the force and turn it back on them. I really want to be a hero, but everyone told me that I couldn't because my quirk relies on other people, and that I'd be a sidekick at best, and I, pretty much gave up. The girl swallowed a lump in her throat and took a shaky breath, and Monoma wanted to comfort her. But she kept speaking instead. But then I saw you in the sports festival. Your quirk is so powerful, and even if it relies on other people, you use it so well, and you were so smart. And it made me realize that just because my quirk relies on people to use, doesn't mean I can't be a hero. I just need to work a little harder, you know? Monoma was nodding as she spoke, and when she finished he smiled. Genuinely smiled, and leaned down to her level slightly. Exactly, Hamada-kun. Don't let other people tell you what you can and can't do, other people are dumb. The girl laughed a little, tugging on her hair nervously. Only you can decide how powerful you want to be, it's about how hard you're willing to work. And that quirk is totally badass. The strategic possibilities are amazing. You could. Monoma almost started gushing his thought process right there, but realized with a start that his class and all the first years had gathered to watch the two of them. Your quirk is only as powerful as you make it, I heard someone say that once. If you keep working hard, I think you'll make a great hero. Monoma sunk a little lower and leaned in to stage whisper to the girl. You might have to watch out, I wouldn't mind taking your quirk and testing it out a bit. The girl laughed and looked back to where a group of her classmates were waving excitedly at her. What class are you in, Hamada-kun? Monoma asked, and he could feel his classmates tense up at the question. Geez, he wasn't that much of an a-hole. I'm in Class 1A. I know you don't really like to dash. Oh, nonsense. I just don't like my Class A. Have you noticed that they didn't show up to orientation? His classmates groaned, but his Kohai giggled, so he continued anyway. I might have to stop by and give you some training. I really do want to try out that quirk of yours. The girl's face was practically glowing, and Monoma felt all warm inside. Really? That would be so amazing, senpai. Thank you. Her friends were practically screaming as she ran back to them, the group talking excitedly and stealing glances in his direction. He stood, straightened his tie, and retreated back into his class, ignoring the fond looks from his classmates and the way they made him want to smile like an idiot. After that interaction, the first years became considerably more open, and Hamada eventually returned with her friends in tow, introducing them to him. Doman Aichi, a blue-haired, black-eyed boy with the ability to make people weak and tired by continuously talking to them. He seemed to have fully embraced that ability because he acted like he could talk for hours, with virtually no filter between his mind and mouth. He seemed nervous around Monoma, but his goofy smile and teasing nudges at his friends indicated a bright and comedic personality. Hirota Chizu, a tall, quiet girl with bright green eyes, whose pastel pink hair hung perfectly down to her knees. She could manipulate her own and other people's hair. She just bowed deeply to him, muttering a greeting that made him think she was definitely the responsible one. Kawasaki Isaac, a charismatic dark blonde boy with pale hazel eyes who had two large horns on his head that generated blue electricity between them. He said it worked like kinetic energy. He could build up a charge and then expel it through his fingertips. He had a cocky smile not unlike Monoma's own, and an accent he hadn't heard before. The boy reached to high-five his upperclassman before recoiling and bowing deeply, and Hamada explained that he was from Australia. The boy just grinned, asked Monoma to please call me Isaac, mate, and gave the blonde a thumbs up, whilst Doman laughed in the background throughout the entire interaction. Finally, Tahani Hana, a short, sweet girl with pale green hair and eyes who apparently didn't have bones, but a jelly substance that she could harden and soften at will. That meant that when she turned off her quirk, she became extremely pliable and soft, and when she put more effort into it, it had an effect similar to Kirishima from 2A. She apparently could also harden to the point that pointed bone could break through her skin in parts of her body like her knuckles or elbows, making hits especially devastating. She was blushing furiously the entire time Monoma talked to her and always looked slightly strained from using her quirk. She almost reminded Monoma of Midoriya from 2A, but better. Your quirks are all amazing. I wouldn't mind training with all of you, he said, and they looked between each other excitedly before Hirota spoke in her low, even voice. Monoma-senpai, you don't have to do that for us. We don't want to be a bother. No, it's mutually beneficial. I can show you different ways to use your quirks and help you improve, and then I can also get practice holding and using multiple quirks at once. It would really be no problem. The first years were practically vibrating with excitement, and Monoma saw Nakatani accidentally squish into the floor a couple of times as they walk off, stumbling slightly and earning a bright laugh from Doman each time. Monoma-kun. Kendo called for him from a group on the other side of the room, and he made his way over to her where she's talking to a pair of third years. The upperclassmen nod and walk away, and Kendo turns to him. That was really nice, what you did for Hamada-kun. Monoma smiled and waved her off for the second time that day. What? It's not like I was going to insult a first year. And she and her friends have genuinely powerful quirks that I'd love to get experience with. Kendo just shook her head and smiled fondly at him. Sure, whatever you say, Monoma-kun. He ran a hand through his hair. Geez, Kendo-san, we've known each other for a year. Call me Nito, he said with a smile, and she tilted her head. Okay, but you have to call me Itsuka. Deal. The students of Class 2B were all sitting in their common room at Heights Alliance when Shinso walked through the door, lugging a suitcase, a backpack, and a duffel bag with him. Kendo and Monoma exchanged a glance, and the blonde brushed his hand against her arm as they made their way toward him. Need a hand? Kendo grinned, holding up her enlarged hands in front of her, and Monoma did the same. Sure, if it's not too much trouble. The two teens shook their heads and Monoma picked up the suitcase while Kendo took the duffel bag, holding it easily in one enlarged hand as they walked alongside Shinso. So do you know what room you're in? Yeah, 4th floor, 4th room. The other two exchanged a glance and smiled at him. That's next to my room, Monoma said, and Kendo nodded. And opposite mine. Shinso just hummed in response. They took the elevator up to the 4th floor and Shinso unlocked the door to his room, the three of them dumping the bags inside. So who else is on this floor? Well, the other girl is Tokage, and then we also have Tsuburaba and Tetsu. Shinso squinted slightly as he seemed to try and remember who they were, and then he nodded. So this is the chaotic floor, and then they stuck class rep in here to try and bring some order into it? I'm guessing that's why I was put here too. No, the social floor. Don't be rude. Kendo scolded, and Shinso pretended to be thinking. Well then why am I here? I'm the opposite of social. Unlike Monoma or Tsuburaba. Don't compare my social graces to Tsuburaba. Monoma said in feigned offense, and Kendo mimicked him, both of them pressing a hand to their chests and looking at him in shock. What? Shinso replied, deadpan, and Monoma broke, waving the other student off and laughing lightly. Tsuburaba-kun tends to have a dirty mind, to say the least. Kendo explained and Shinso sighed, looking to Monoma as he flicked his hair in annoyance. Don't tell me he's like a copy of the grape kid from 2A. Monoma scoffed at that, waving his hands at Shinso. No, nobody in Class 2B would ever stoop to that level of disrespect. That kid is disgusting. Monoma scoffed, and Kendo made a disgusted face in agreement. He isn't even as bad as Kaminari. He'll never go out of his way to be gross like those two, he just. Monoma didn't know how to describe it, so Kendo took over. Tsuburaba-kun is just kind of, I don't know, he's just always got that stuff in the back of his mind. Like in the joint training thing we did at the start of 2nd semester, he got taken hostage by Azui-san and the only thing he talked about for the rest of the day was that she had her tongue around him. She explained further, and Monoma nodded along in agreement. I don't know, that kind of just sounds like interest to me. Kendo looked mildly thoughtful but Monoma scoffed, subconsciously stepping between Shinso and his friend. What, are you not interested in girls, Monoma-kun? Shinso was trying to provoke him, but Monoma was apparently immune to most of his methods of attack. Monoma and Kendo shared a look and seemed to have an entire conversation in a single second, ending when Monoma shrugged dejectedly. No, Monoma replied blatantly, and Kendo looked suspiciously at Shinso. Well, that's one way to get the word out, I guess. Is there something wrong with that? Also, interest? Please don't tell me you're like Tsuburaba-kun, Shinsu-kun. She sighed, and Shinso shook his head. No. I'm not here to make friends or date or whatever, I'm here to become a hero. That's it. Monoma and Kendo shared another look, and Shinso felt decidedly out of the loop. What? Oh, nothing. We were just thinking. Perhaps you weren't put on this floor to influence us, but the other way around. Monoma said, taking Kendo by the wrist and returning to the elevator. He waved to Shinso with a lazy smile as the doors closed, the pair heading back down to their classmates. Shinso stirred awake in a slightly unfamiliar room. It felt like his general studies dorm room, but slightly. He literally rolled out of bed and caught himself just before he landed flat on the floor, hair hanging down over his face. Shinso had no doubt he looked like a mess. That was becoming normal for him, though. He was just starting to wake himself up when a dramatic shout echoes from the room next door, where Monoma had probably discovered something mildly inconvenient. The guy was the definition of overdramatic, his hero costume was an entire suit for God's sake. Monoma did seem to have a soft side to him. Shinso remembered orientation, where the blonde had been all encouraging words and calm positivity when interacting with a group of first years. They seemed so infatuated with him, and honestly, he couldn't blame them for the interest. Monoma inspired people, most likely accidentally, he just had that kind of energy. Whether you wanted to impress him or pummel him into the ground, he made the people around him want to do better. The memories of the overdramatic blonde in training sessions almost got him to smile. Almost. Shinso had found Monoma running through his mind obnoxiously embarrassingly often ever since their first joint training session, when the teachers had announced that he would join the hero course in 2nd year and they had saved each other from Midoriya's quirk freakout. Minoma was a lot calmer than he seemed in his interactions with Class A, and he was smart too. An interesting character, no doubt, with a tragic backstory to boot. Shinso checked the time, decided that it was too early to function, and started to change into his uniform anyway. He wanted to get down and grab some breakfast before the rest of the students came and tried to interact with him. He already reached his socialization limit the previous day with Minoma and Kendo. Just as he chucked his blazer and tie onto his bed to put on later and slipped on his socks, there was a knock on the door. He resumed buttoning his shirt, and it was about halfway done up when he opened the door to reveal Minoma standing there and fiddling with his tie. The blonde's expression shifted for a moment, and Shinso swore his eyes drifted down to the purple-haired boy's chest for just a second, before he cleared his throat and smiled charmingly. Itsuka, Tokage, Kodai, Komori, Tetsutetsu, Tsubiraba, Owaze, Kaibara, Shiozaki, Tsunatori, just. Everyone wants to know if you will be gracing us with your presence during breakfast this morning. He had been counting people on his fingers, but gave up and instead leant against Shinso's doorframe. Itsuka? Shinso mocked, and Minoma rubbed the back of his neck, looking off to the side for a moment. She insisted. Anyway, you seem. Minoma looked him up and down and stifled a cough. Dressed, so let's go. What was that? Was Minoma actually uncomfortable? Shinso took note in the back of his mind. It was always important to know how to provoke someone into talking. He shouldn't exhaust all his material right that moment. But what was that? Did the way I answered the door make you uncomfortable, Minoma-kun? Shinso stepped forward and smirked at the blonde who looked like he had never been flustered in his life. Including that exact moment, because Minoma just gave him a look of distaste that was somehow incredibly hurtful. No, I just wasn't expecting you to look like such a complete wreck. Insults, mature. Shinso had to admit that Minoma put up a good defense. A wreck that you have really taken a liking to though. Shinso recalled what Minoma had said to him in that first joint training battle. Minoma was definitely slightly pink now as he shifted on his feet, but nonetheless he kept talking. Yeah, that was before I had to get woken up by you falling on your butt on the way down the hall at 2 in the morning though. Shinso didn't think anyone would have heard that, and he didn't have a response. You should really get more sleep, you look like you need it, Minoma said softly, reaching forward and running a hand back through Shinso's flat hair. He has his bottom lip caught between his teeth as his fingers weaved into Shinso's hair, and Shinso knew he had reached his limit with this guy. The taller boy scowled and stepped back, slamming his door to a muffled shriek from the blonde. I was standing there, you know. The nerve on some people. There were muffled footsteps and the sound of 2 people muttering outside of his door, before one by one his neighbors left their rooms and took the elevator down. Whatever, Shinso doesn't need breakfast anyway. He finished getting dressed and laid around in his room until his alarm went off, signifying the fact that he had 15 minutes until class started. He opened his door and almost stepped on a plate with 2 pieces of toast sitting on it. You could have broken my nose a hole. Was written on a small piece of paper, and Shinso begrudgingly took the plate and ate the toast before heading out to class. Shinso-kun, we'll walk with you. Kendo waved and Tetsu and Minoma ran over and fell into place around him. They didn't say anything about the plate even though Shinso knew one of them put it there, and he was grateful. The note was absolutely from Minoma, who pouted at him from the other side of the group, but he didn't say anything either. They arrived at class, greeting their teacher and getting their schedules handed to them. It was definitely different to the class layout in general studies. For example, there were 2 kinds of hero training on the list. Regular hero training and joint hero practice. Eraserhead and I noticed the divide between Class A and B last year, so this year we have taken precautions to try and bring you closer together. This is not exclusive to your classes though. In fact, this will be joint training that takes place at the same time for all 1st, 2nd, and 3rd years of the hero course. You won't all work together all the time, but occasionally you will have a class with students of different years. Vlad King paused for a moment and then continued. Minoma had his head turned in Kendo's direction, likely making angry and confused faces at her, judging by her returning amused eye roll. You'll notice that it is called joint hero practice, not just joint hero training. That is because we will take advantage of the larger group, and these classes will be for putting you in real-world situations. While hero training might focus on developing skills, hero practice will put them to the test in scenes like the USJ or training grounds. That made sense, actually. With everything that had been going on in the hero world and the rise in crime, it seemed good to present the next generation of UA students as a united front, and increased training and interpersonal relationships was a good way to accomplish that. Not that Shinso thought that he would enjoy or particularly benefit from spending 4 classes a week with not only the overly sociable Class B students, but the chaotic Class A kids too, but it was a smart move for everyone else. So you will have hero training every day except Tuesday and Thursday, and hero practice every Tuesday, Thursday, and a double lesson on Saturday. This does mean school finishes at 5 p.m. instead of 4 p.m. for the hero course, but since this is essentially a boarding school now, we're allowed to do that. A few students groaned exaggeratedly, but Shinso could sense the excitement in the air. Every one of the people in that class was dead set on being a hero, so the idea of extra training piqued their interest even if they wouldn't admit it. Shinso pulled out his phone and took a photo of the schedule because he had no doubt he would lose the paper somewhere. They had world history first, then Japanese, PE, English, lunch, hero training, science, and a class he didn't recognize called health, personal care. I'm sure you've all noticed the 2 new additions to your classes. Your final class on Monday is called personal care, or PC. That class will be focused on teaching you how to maintain a healthy lifestyle while living in the dorms, and once you leave. Food choices, hygiene, and things like choosing an agency or renting an apartment that you will have to deal with in 2 years. The class murmured quietly, and Vlad King continued. The second edition is the free lesson on Saturday morning. It's a class that you can spend training, catching up on homework with a teacher present to help, or whatever you see fit, but it has to be productive. Anybody who chooses to leave the classroom will have to be in a pair or group of 3 with a person that we can trust to keep you on track. It's not a class for goofing off. People were muttering slightly louder, sending conspiratory glances to their friends. There will also be occasions when your regular training will be interrupted, such as excursions, assemblies, drills, etc. You will be told in homeroom if something like that is going to happen during the day. If you arrive late to class without a reason or explanation from a member of faculty, you get cleaning duty instead of leaving early on Saturdays. Shinso didn't care much about that part. He wasn't dumb, he could arrive to class on time. As you can see, you have world history now, so I will be going. Welcome to your first day back at UA High. Minoma's hand shot up just as the teacher turned to leave. Yes, Minoma-kun? Do the other years have their free lesson at the same time? So he wanted to use that time to train with his little protege, huh? Honestly, that was pretty cute. Wait, what? Yes. The hero course student schedules are much more aligned than they were previously in regards to hero work and extra classes. If you arrange it with both their teacher and your own, you would be able to work with someone from a different year during that time. Minoma nodded, and Vlad King left the room right at 8:10 a.m. Minoma was conflicted, to say the least. On one hand, the joint training meant more quirks to practice with, but on the other it meant dealing with the insolent Class 2A. Well, not all of them were insolent. Tokage had practically forced Kudakuji into his face until he admitted that the giant was nice. And he supposed Kirishima Ijuru's backstory was inspiring, now that he had heard it. Whatever, Bakugu was still an absolute prick, Minato was still disgusting, and Class 2B deserved just as much if not more attention than 2A. Minoma wondered what Shinso thought of each of the students. The teen made it pretty clear that he was jealous of their heroic quirks and that he wanted to beat them like Minoma did, but he also had an air of independence that the blonde didn't. Minoma wanted the best for himself and his friends. Shinso wanted to take everyone down and claw his way to the top. He didn't know how he felt about that, specifically. He sat through class, barely paying attention as he waited for lunch and hero training directly afterward. He was nervous for hero training, particularly where Shinso was involved. His quirk had become more powerful. He could get someone under his control from any kind of vocal reaction to him speaking. Pairing that with his voice modulator, recent ability to throw his voice, and hand-to-hand combat training, he was a difficult opponent. In their more recent joint training with Shinso and 1A last year, Shinso had revealed his most recent tactic, saying outrageous things, because as soon as someone acknowledged that he spoke, from a gasp to a laugh, he could get them under his control. Monoma could only imagine the kind of disgusting things he might have picked up to use against all of them, and worried that even in their brief interactions the previous day that the other boy had already found plenty of material to work with. Finally, class finished and they all headed out for lunch. He and Itsuka, were walking together with their other friends close behind when they noticed Shinso trying to sneak off to sit alone at a table, so they all followed after him, only to be greeted by another two groups of people that had sought him out at the same time. "Shinston, come sit with us," the groups said all at once, looking at each other in confusion. Monoma was fuming. Those two A-brats hadn't changed at all over their holidays, they were still trying to sneak in and steal things that 2B rightfully deserved. Shinso wouldn't want to hang out with any of them, right? The group belonging to the green-haired kid was standing awkwardly, Midoriya with Ida and Yurika next to him, Azui, Todoroki, Tokoyami and Yaoyorozu close behind. Opposite them, Kaminari, Kirishima and Ishido, with Siro, Jiru, and even Bakugo backing them up. When did Shinso become so popular? It was probably Midoriya and Kaminari's doing. They got annoyingly close to the other teen. They had done that with Todoroki and Bakugo respectively as well. It was Monoma's turn to befriend a stoic a-hole. Come on. He rolled his eyes and stepped forward from his group. He could already feel Kendo poised to karate chop him in the head, but he ignored it. "Oh, how pleasant to see you all here. I had no idea what could have happened to you all. You ditched your duties regarding the new first years. I was almost worried. Then I remembered that Class A has always been inconsiderate, and figured you just thought you were too important for them." He smiled cruelly at them, and Bakugo shoves his hands deeper into his pockets, matching his smile with a completely unsubtle scowl. "Oh, definitely, we heard about the little first-year girl who was obsessing over you and decided that extras with such awful taste weren't worth our time." Bakugo spoke, and Monoma was so close to punching him. "Bakugo! It's just like you to make accusations before you know anything, Monoma-kun. Do you really think we would abandon other students like that?" the little green boy said, and Monoma chuckled. Did they seriously think they could outsass him? Kendo had lowered her hand, which basically meant she was giving him full permission to lay into these brats. She had friends outside of the hero course too, and no doubt she wanted Monoma to defend them. "Is it really so wrong for me to assume so? You've done it to nearly every other student at this school. I bet none of you could even name one student in general studies or management. I would include support, but we all know you SCK up to Hatsum-san because she can build you stuff. She's more than that, in case you didn't know. She's great at video games and she's passionate and gives amazing advice, but you wouldn't know that because you only talked to her for long enough to get your hands on her gadgets. Of course we don't FNG talk to them, they're extras and we couldn't care less." Bakugo growled, and several other 2A students jumped to interrupt the conversation. "Kaken, don't be cruel. We just haven't really had an opportunity to dash. You know that everyone participated in the culture festival, right? You realize that you've had countless school events that gave you opportunities to talk to people outside your class, but you never have." Midoriya went quiet, and Todoroki put a hand on his shoulder. "The things we are dealing with are more important than unnecessary relationships with other students," Todoroki said, and at that point Monoma was fuming. Midoriya's eyes went wide and he looked to Todoroki, who seemed to realize that what he said didn't help their point. He started to search for something to say, and Monoma was about to cut him off when, "Right, well I think my decision has been made." Shinso stood from his table and walked toward Monoma, propping an elbow on his shoulder and turning to glare at the Class A crowd. "That was low, even for you. All of the second years, as well as the first years and the third years, can all have value and they're all important, because they're unique human beings, not words on a page that you can manipulate whenever it suits you." There was force behind Shinso's words, and Monoma felt his heart flutter. "Get them, Shinso." The Class B crowd turned to leave with one last cold glare to their opposing class, while the rest of the second year watched them sit down in shock. Yaoyorozu, literally the only Class A student that Monoma could stand due to her helping his classmates in the training camp attack and her friendship with Kendo, and who had been wise enough to keep her mouth shut during that exchange, came up to them a few minutes later. The girl was wringing her hands nervously and smiled at them. Tetsu smiled back, because he was an idiot, and it seemed to ground the other student. I'm sorry about them, you're right. Our class doesn't make enough of an effort, and there's no excuse. We really hope that you could give us another chance. It is important to care for our fellow students, not just as heroes but as human beings. I hope that you have helped the others to start to recognize that. See, that's what he was talking about. This girl is respectable. Oh, you're fine. I like you, Yaoyorozu-san. You seem like a good person. However, I simply can't forgive the rest of your class when you're the only one who came over here and spoke to us, and you weren't even an offender here. Actions speak louder than words. If the rest of your class really wants to try harder, then they should do it instead of just sending their vice rep to talk about it. The girl just nodded and returned to her friends as Monoma slid down into his chair dramatically. You did really well, Nito-kun. I'm proud of you. Kendo playfully punched him in the arm, and he smiled at her before sighing dramatically and sinking further under the table. I'm proud of me too, they can be so annoying. Kaminari is weirdly obsessed with you, don't you think, Shinsu-kun? Kendo laughed and Shin-so let out a quiet snort through his nose, and it was just about the most appealing, terrible laugh Monoma had ever heard. Yeah. When we first met he told me I look like I'd be popular with the ladies. What the hell is that even supposed to mean? Monoma stiffened and slid back upright in his seat, making eye contact with Kendo. Oh Shinsu-kun, you innocent child. That's closeted speak for I think you're hot. Kaminari's got it bad for you. He drawled, pretending to be uninterested, and Shin-so seemed to malfunction for a second, an adorable shade of peachy blush washing over his cheeks. Wasn't that adorable? He blushed in peach. You think so? Oh, obviously. Nobody's that protective over someone they've just met if they aren't crushing. Shin-so recovered with wide eyes and smirked, leaning in closer to Monoma. Oh really? So what's your excuse then, Sheet? What is he supposed to say to that? He's basically backed himself into a corner here. What can he Yeah. I can hardly turn down a fight with class and now can I? Shin-so huffed and leaned away, and Monoma plastered on his biggest sheet-eating grin as he looked back over to where Tokage had an equally large smile on her face. They somehow operated on the same wavelength after all this time, and both of them were about to crack up at how hard Shin-so just bombed that. They made eye contact, the girl winked unsubtle, and then her expression went innocent as she turned to Shin-so. So what do you think? You interested in Kaminari-kun? Shin-so choked on whatever he had been eating and shook his head slowly as he recovered. Pity, yellow and purple go well together. I suppose there's always Monoma. Oh, you Tokage. That was uncalled for. Shin-so and Monoma stare at each other for a minute, both growing increasingly more flustered as each second passes. Monoma thought he was doing a good job at staying composed, until Shinsu's eyes flicked down his torso and back up to his face again. Monoma was sure his face isn't as appealing as Shinsu's peach blush, wide lavender eyes, and sharp tense jawline, so he cleared his throat, turned away and kicked Tokage under the table. Kendo laughed at their antics and then changed the topic to their next class, hero training. As the group resumed lively conversation, Monoma zoned out slightly and watched as Shin-so ate quietly and gazes around the table. There was something genuine in his eyes as he ate in one side of his mouth, cheek puffed out slightly, and he almost looked childlike. Monoma tuned back into the conversation in time to make some remarks on quirks he wanted to swipe, and when the bell rings, Tokage and Kendo pull him away from the group. You really are into Shinsu-kun, aren't you? Monoma pouted and looked between the two girls who knew him way too well for his own good, then let out a disgruntled sigh. I don't know. Probably. Please don't ruin this for me. He didn't react badly to me being not interested in girls, and that's literally the best I could hope for. Don't try to push it. The girls aw at him and then wrapped themselves around each of his arms. So what do you like about him? Monoma didn't like the topic of conversation, but if he didn't respond then they'd stay stuck to his arms all day and he'll start getting HRM comments from other classes again. I don't know. He's determined, and he works hard, and he's smart. He just seems like he knows what he wants and he's composed and weirdly flirty, but then there's that soft side as well, and his you can't help what the heart longs for thing to Midoriya at the sports festival was so. I really do like him, this is unfortunate. Monoma was gushing and it was horrible, but his friends were still making noises at him and clutching his arms, so he wasn't particularly concerned. Plus he's really fit, which never hurts, and did you see him blush earlier? It's peach. Guys, how does someone resist that? The girls go from, and he pulled his arms away and cleared his expression just before they entered the classroom. Okay, we're heading to ground beta for training today, let's go. Vlad King was apparently wasting no time, and Monoma felt excitement rising in his chest. Who'd been working over the holidays? Will anyone have some kind of new ability? Monoma definitely did, and with the new gadgets he got as a thanks for finally getting Hatsum to relax a bit in final semester last year, he thought he would make a formidable opponent, even to the people who knew him well. Actually, the whole Hatsum thing was pretty easy. Monoma thought she looked exhausted and absolutely not healthy, so he, Tokage, Kendo, Tetsu, and Suburaba went to try and get her out of the workshop. After almost a straight week of trying to bribe or force her out, in the end, all they had to do was spout research on the effects of exhaustion on the mind and tell Hatsum that she wasn't at her best when she didn't relax. The girls spent the afternoon at their dorm, eating food, beating everyone at every video game, and then sleeping straight through from 7 p.m. on Saturday to 12 p.m. on Sunday. Needless to say, there was now a group in Class 2B simply labeled the May Protection Squad, whose job was to go in at least once a week and make Hatsum come and take a night off to recharge. She'd made a good friend in Kodai, because Hatsum liked to keep talking and the other girl was perfectly happy to listen. Too good of a friend, if Kodai's group chat spam freak out whenever Hatsum fell asleep on her was any indication, but Monoma wasn't going to push the issue. The group arrived at ground beta and stood outside, talking excitedly as they waited for Vlad King's instructions. Today you will be working individually, essentially playing a massive game of hide and seek. All 21 of you will be somewhere inside ground beta, each with a different colored tag to wrap around your wrist. The aim is to find other people and take their tags. You will be judged at the end based on whether you still have your own tag and how many other people's tags you have. If you lose your tag, you are still in the round and can continue to capture others until your 25-minute time limit is up. So it was kind of like a cavalry battle, but solo instead of in groups, and everyone was worth the same amount. Anything goes. You can permanently trap people after you take their tag, you can make truces, you can set traps, you can use any method that you see fit. There will be 2 rounds. Between them we will have time to talk and reflect before you reset for the final round. Okay, simple enough. All Monoma had to do was move in increments of 10 minutes. Maybe find someone to steal a quirk off of at the start and then move through people one by one. As long as he stayed below his 10-minute time limit, then everything would work out fine. Monoma had an advantage in this kind of training, because while he could plan and strategize in fights, his opponent couldn't until the very last second because they didn't know what quirks he might have. That simple advantage had led to a lot of his classmates baiting him into attacks to get an idea of his quirk, and while it worked the first few times, they really needed to change up their strategy more often. Not that he really wanted them to, it made his life way easier when his opponents were predictable. Tetsu always fought like a tank, kind of slow but very sturdy and very hard-hitting. He was dense and had a one-track mind, but being able to outsmart him would do nothing if you couldn't take his hits. Kendo was partial to sneak attacks. She liked to outsmart people and deliver a swift hit to the head while they were disorientated. She's clever and she'd found a lot of uses for her quirk, her martial arts skills on par with or better than that of Ojiro from 2A. She had a weakness to range and to tank fighters like Tetsu. Ibra disliked violence unless she felt it was justified. Be nice outside of the ring and she won't be malicious inside it. She's powerful but occasionally blinded by her faith. If you can get into a close-range fight then she crumbled easily, like what Ida did in the sports festival. Shouta liked to team up with or go against offensive quirks because it gave him more opportunity, but he was also nervous and liked to stay in the background and use his quirk while someone else fought head-on. He was a clever strategist with his quirk. He's amazing at the split-second decisions that determine when to unleash his second hit. Tokage would never be offensive when she didn't need to. She'll always try to find a teammate to play as a pawn because while she's an incredible strategist, she didn't have much firepower aside from her combat training. She had gained a recent ability to dodge attacks by dropping body parts before they can be hit, but she is still weak to the overwhelming, unavoidable power that comes with someone like Bakugo, Bondo, Fukudashi, or Todoroki. Pony was bold and used her quirk well. She's fast and observant. Her quirk was almost like a lesser version of the number 2 Hero Hawks, and Monoma had no doubt it could get to that level as she became able to control more and more detached horns. She was timid, however, and she knew when she was overwhelmed. She could get frantic and emotional if you pushed her too hard in a fight, leaving her with openings you could exploit. Monoma was jolted out of his observations when Vlad King handed him a piece of cloth. It was smooth and a dark teal color, and Monoma velcroed it in place around his arm. It was strong Velcro, relatively easy to pull off with a solid grip, but it wasn't going to fall off on its own or get tugged off accidentally. Pulling it off would require a very deliberate grab and a harsh tug, which Monoma appreciated. Head into the arena and find the post that matches the color of your band. An alarm will sound when it is time for you to start, and remember that I can see everything you do, so don't try to sneak off early. When you get a tag, you wrap it around one of your arms. You must have all of your tags on your arms at all times, which means that the more you have, the more of a target you are. You are allowed to take multiple tags from a person in a single attack. Anything goes as long as you have the most by the end. That doesn't sound very heroic. Monoma reached his post, a 7-foot pole with a flag that matched his own in color but was completely different in texture, likely to make sure that students don't take them and try to pass them off as points. He couldn't see any other flags from where he stood, but considering the fact that he was in a massive cityscape, he wasn't worried. 21 students spread across 3 acres of fake city. The training ground was used for an entrance exam for about 100 people, and Monoma barely ran into anybody in his when he was actively looking for people. Monoma observed his surroundings. He was just off the main road that ran through the middle of the training area, nestled on the sidewalk between 2 tall buildings in a way that made the rest of the road slightly out of view. It was eerily silent. Every other time he had been in this training area, it had been alive with the sounds of people fighting or yelling orders, but there was nothing. No regular city ambience like cars or conversation, nothing. It was completely silent. Until the alarm sounded, ringing out of hidden speakers and throwing Monoma off just momentarily before he recovered and dashed out onto the main road. He might draw attention to himself, but that was what he wanted. Looking around quickly, he saw an abandoned peach flag and an equally lonely light green one, so he made a show of looking around in the middle of the arena and then slipped into one of the buildings. As he sat in the arena, thinking, he saw a familiar dark green eye watching him through a window, and his suspicions were completely confirmed when he noticed that the small bit of flesh surrounding the eye was all that was there, the amused eyes absent from Tokage's usual grin. He walked over to it and opened the window, and the chunk of face floated into the building. The fact that Tokage had allowed him so close to her could mean one of 2 things: either she wanted a truce, or she was luring him into a trap with whoever she was already in a truce with. Tokage was a team player, until she found a way to weaponize her quirk, that is. When another chunk containing an ear whizzed into the building, Monoma spoke. "So, are you looking to team up, or are you trying to lure me into a trap?" The single eye rolled, and it was mildly unsettling, but Monoma continued. He reached forward and tapped on the side of the jagged piece, feeling Tokage's quirk pick up inside him. He removed the lower part of his arm that held the band, and then followed the eye as it drifted away at a reasonable pace. If it was a trap, he could just focus on keeping the limb away while he took them down, then bring it back when he was done. Monoma was confident in his hand-to-hand combat and evasion techniques. It was part of the extra training he took on. Learning to fight in case he couldn't get his hand on a quirk was important, as well as learning to fight so that he could get his hand on a quirk in the first place. Unlike Floaty Girl or the Luigi villain's hand dude, due to recent developments he could activate his quirk through any contact to a person's body, including a punch or some other attack. The downside is that he couldn't get a quirk through clothing, So while Kirishima or Yaoyorozu are easy targets, a costume like Tokoyami's or Midoriya's would make it difficult. The story behind discovering his new abilities was a funny one. During an all-night study session with Kendo and Tetsu, he had experimentally copied his own quirk to see if he could get it without limits. He had been able to see just how far his quirk could progress, so he knew exactly what he was working toward. Being able to take a quirk through any physical contact, and then store up to 10 of them at once, being able to hold each for an indeterminate amount of time, it lasted longer than he could hold the copied version of his quirk and swap them out at will. There was an ability that he was unsure of, simply because it would outlast the amount of time he was able to copy his own quirk at full power, and that was the ability to code quirks into his DNA and hold on to them. It was a theory at best, but there is the possibility of an ability to keep quirk details held secretly inside his DNA, meaning that he can recopy them and activate the quirks he saved at any time, effectively permanently taking the power to bestow onto himself whenever he felt like it. Obviously, he was only able to hold the full power version for 8 minutes, so he didn't get the chance to fully absorb any quirks, but he and Vlad King had theorized that perhaps if he focused on absorbing the quirk, not just mimicking it, he had the potential to keep it with him forever. Monoma didn't want to get his hopes up though. It probably wasn't going to happen. There's no way a side character like him, someone that was meant to go through so much hardship, would get access to such an amazing power. None of his family had any kind of stockpiling ability. Then again, none of them had trained their quirks as hard as he does, and none of them had a quirk quite the same as his. Monoma had toyed with the idea of a capture weapon to pull people in. It would be much easier if he had a way to grab people from afar and force them closer to him so that he could take their quirk. It would really make his life a whole lot easier, but after watching Shinso completely fail with his many times, he decided he would need to get something a bit different since he didn't have Eraserhead helping him and that thing looked like a lot of trouble. He kept his tagged arm floating just next to where it should be, and Tokage's eye and ear took him into another building, climbing the stairs and meeting the rest of Tokage's body. Or most of it at least, Monoma thought to himself. She was facing away from him, mostly because she was a bit self-conscious of the way her face looks when she pulled off all her features, but she apparently still had a mouth because her familiar strong voice rung out. "So are you good to team up? Like what we did in that training battle last year?" Monoma recalled it fondly. They were in a team of 3 alongside Tsuburaba, and Tokage had lured in other teams, then used her floating hands to pull people into Monoma so that he could steal their quirks and take them down alongside Tsuburaba's defenses. Monoma looked around, and Tokage laughed, her one eye still trained on him. "To answer your question from before, no, I'm not going to trap you. You're probably the most valuable asset to me, considering the circumstances." That was true. The two of them worked together well and had built up a solid companionship that meant they maneuver around each other well in fights, and Tokage was especially good at predicting his actions and responding accordingly, as Monoma was good at predicting her. It would be difficult for the two of them to fight on opposite teams, and Tokage was still relatively without any offensive power, something that Monoma could bring in droves. "Yeah, alright. Do you plan to pick up anyone else, or will it be the two of us?" Tokage was contemplative for a moment before she spoke up. "It would be useful to have another person, someone with an offensive quirk so you don't need to start off without, but the more people we bring in, the more we'll have to take out and it'll make betraying our teammates more appealing than it should be." Monoma nodded in agreement. Bringing too many people into an alliance just meant they needed to split their tags between more people, and it would tempt them to betray a teammate and steal their tags for themselves. 2 people worked perfectly well. "Okay, do you have any locations?" Tokage listed the people she had located and the alliances she could see. Really, she was incredibly useful in a fight. No doubt she would be a great hero. We can assume that if alliances are formed, they'll be between friends or people whose quirks really complement each other, and we can also guess who would stay alone out of pride like Kamakiri-kun, Kurwaro-kun, and possibly Owaze-kun or Kaibara-kun. Monoma definitely agreed. Some of his classmates had outlooks similar to that of Bakugu from 2A, where they thought they could get things done alone and would only team up if it's absolutely necessary. Kurwaro liked to be alone so he could move through the shadows, and "We should turn all the lights on. It will attract people, and it'll keep Kurwaro out." Tokage agreed and her hands detached, flying around the building to flick on every possible light SWs. Okay, so, who do you want to get first? I can see Tsunatori, Kaibara, Tetsu, and Kodai relatively nearby. Having Kaibara's quirk would be useful, but his attacks hurt and they will definitely deal damage to Monoma in their fight. The wisest option would be to take on Tetsu, and then Kaibara directly after while Monoma still held the metal quirk. I think Tetsu is a good first option, he said, and Tokage's mouth detached so that it could grin at him. Keep an eye on me, K? It said, before her single eye and ear flew away to locate and lure in their friend. Monoma trusted that she would make it look natural, and he doubted Tetsu would give it a second thought if he saw Tokage's limbs. Even though she'd never let someone see her unless she wanted them to. Tetsu was determined and strong, but his one-track mind made him easily manipulated and predictable. He always pushed until the very end, which was both his most admirable trait and his biggest weakness. Okay, in he comes. Maybe hide out until the last second, grab him from the back while he's going to attack me. I'll have an eye back, so you don't need to worry. Monoma nodded and crouched down underneath the stairs right next to the doorway. He doubted that Tetsu would look back at the door once he saw Tokage, and even if he did, it'd be a quick glance that will brush over Monoma's shadowed form. 1 minute, Tokage muttered, and Monoma nodded. His strategy was simple. Tetsu liked to play tank, constantly staying metallic and pushing forward solidly, but Monoma liked to use his quirk differently. He could activate the metallic feeling in his body just as he throws a punch and deactivate after it landed, meaning that he could dodge the rest of Tetsu's attacks while the original holder of the quirk was still slowed by his heavy limbs. Plus, he had Tokage's quirk too, which would help with dodging as well. 10 seconds, Tokage muttered warningly, and Monoma shifted his legs, prepared to dart out from his hiding spot as fast as possible. Tokage's eye and ear flew into the room and reattached themselves to her face as she removed a hand, floating it over and pretending that she was messing with the light switches. Tetsu sneaked into the room, noticed Tokage, and looked around the room warily. Monoma couldn't see his face, but that was good because it meant that Tetsu couldn't see his either. The boy walked further into the building, already in full metal mode, raising a hand to try and grab Tokage's tag. Her hair was covering the fact that she only had one ear, and Tetsu probably thought she didn't have any as he got closer, and Monoma darted forward and brushed his hand swiftly against Tetsu's hair as Tokage spun around to face him, grinning with one eye, one ear, a mouth and a small button nose. Monoma saw Tetsu recoil slightly at the red hole in the flesh where her eye should be, and in that moment he struck. Monoma hadn't had any iron that day, so the quirk would be weaker than it could be for Tetsu, who ate almost exclusively red meat and spinach for every meal. Monoma punched Tetsu in the back of the neck, fist shining as smooth silver, and his opponent's head snapped back slightly before he whirled around. Monoma-kun. Oh, I should have known you two would team up again. Monoma just smiled and shook his head, dodging the fist that flew at him by splitting his body in two and then sticking it back together. Monoma darted around him, detaching hands to fly at the band on his wrist at every opportunity he could get, while Tokage did the same. Whenever Tetsu would turn and try to target the girl, a part of Monoma's metallic body would fly over and take the hit instead. He may not be able to use two quirks at once, but the metal effect of Tetsu's quirk stayed behind after he switched to Tokage's, and he could make the swap in less than half a second. Eventually Monoma stopped messing around. He made his hands metal and then switched to Tokage's quirk, flying them at Tetsu and grabbing onto his arms to push him back against a wall. Tokage's hand flew over and stole his band, and then the two of them ran out onto the street as Tetsu pushed against his restraints. Monoma and Tokage ran side by side down the street until they were a safe distance from Tetsu, and Monoma pulled his hands back. Both of them had all of their limbs, but sent one eye forward to look around corners and down alleys as they traveled, turning every now and then to look behind them. Hell yeah, that was perfect, Tokage said, and Monoma laughed as his hand met hers in a high five. You can take that tag, I'll grab the next one. Tokage made a noise of appreciation as she closed the boy's tag, which was a dark magenta, around her forearm, just above her own deep purple one. Who's next? Tokage asked as they slipped into a new building, facing away from him as chunks of her face flew out of the door. Who can you see? Monoma asked instead, and Tokage scoffed amusedly. Give me a second, man, it isn't magic. She paused for a moment, and then held up a hand with 4 fingers open. We've got Kendo, Hananuki, I think I see Kurwaro, but I don't think we'll be able to lure him over here, oh, and Shinso. Monoma mulled it over quietly. On one hand, he can predict Kendo's actions easily, but on the other, that didn't mean he was any better at countering them. Hananuki was dangerous. His quirk wouldn't be great for Monoma to steal, especially if he tried to use Tetsutetsu's quirk and ended up sinking faster into the floor. Kurwaro probably wouldn't leave his spot. He's the type to wait for people to cross paths with him and then attack them ruthlessly. That left Shinso. Monoma did wonder, how many tags do they all have? Kendo has 3, Hananuki has 2, I can't see Kurwaro anymore, and Shinso has 4. What the hell? Monoma nodded. Got 3 bands, then he and Tokage would be equal on 3 too, but Shinso was intriguing, and as long as he doesn't speak then it'd be fine, right? Shinso couldn't hit him without Monoma picking up his quirk, and then neither of them would be able to say anything, making Shinso effectively quirkless. Get Shinso-kun, Monoma said, and Tokage ed teasingly, but understood his reasoning and remained silent until she found him. Okay, he's coming. He's much more cautious than Tetsu-kun though, so I have to keep speeding ahead and then pretending that I'm watching someone while he catches up. God, he's so slow. Tokage whined as she narrated a scene that Monoma couldn't see, but he chuckled all the same. Hey, why don't we both get our ears to F off so we can't hear what he says? Tokage suggested, and Monoma weighed his options. Sure, yes, it would make them immune to whatever Shinso might say to elicit a reaction, but it would also hinder them in terms of a fight. They wouldn't be able to tell how loud they are, or where he is, which would be imperative for the stealth part of their plans. Could they even sneak up on Shinso? He was more cautious than Tetsu. He'd definitely try to get a look around before entering. Okay. So here's a plan, Tokusen, Monoma started, and Tokage groaned. Oh my god. Call me Setsuna, you're one of my best friends and literally everyone except you calls me by my first name. What, Setsuna-chan, have you and Itsuka been talking about me? Because you've both said that to me so far this year. I bet Tetsu would have said something too if he could tell the difference between his first and last name. Tokage snorted, and her voice sounded overtly innocent when she spoke. No, of course we weren't talking about you, we just think that we've all known each other for a year now and we're good friends, so there's no need to be formal. Monoma just huffed. Anyway, the plan is. Shinso was following one of Tokage's eyes as it moved through the city, watching silently as it stopped and looked into a building before flying off in a different direction. It seemed that the eye was generally moving one way, though Shinso couldn't tell if it was towards or away from wherever the rest of her was. He didn't know Tokage's exact limit for how long she could keep a limb isolated, but surely she must be coming close to it. They were about 10 minutes into the task and Shinso had 4 tags total. He was pretty confident in how he'd done so far. It had been pretty simple really. Hunt down the overconfident students, hide in the shadows, challenge them with a random voice, and wait for them to reply. He wasn't even really on the top of his game. His mind was too busy whirling between all the people who had decided to try and befriend him. Fukudashi, Komori, and Tsunatori were always pleasant people and they talked during lunch, and the others had all greeted him to a certain extent when he arrived, but the main offenders were the people on his dorm floor, most notably Tokage, Kendo, and of course, the problem child Monoma. They were all trying to interact with him, and that was the opposite of what Shinso wanted. At least, that was what he told himself. Anyway, back to the task at hand. He followed Tokage's eye, when suddenly her hand came flying over to meet it. Both body parts stopped outside a building, and the hand slid through a crack in the door. Shinso, against his better judgment, peeked past and saw a ways inside the building, not paying attention as he fastened a second tag around his arm. A few seconds later a second hand appeared, both of them sneaking into the room. One of the hands floated over, and Shinso watched in amusement as it tapped him on the back of the head and then flew away. the second hand using the momentum of his turn to rip a tag from his arm and shoot out of the door. "What the hell, Tokage?" he yelled, darting to the door, and the hand that had tapped him on the head grabbed onto the other tag. That one didn't come off though, and Shinso realized at probably the same time that Tokage did that Owaze had welded it to himself. The hand flew away, the eye following shortly after, and Shinso chased it down. "Oi, Shinso, you going after Tokage? Let me come with." Shinso didn't respond, but Owaze was next to him anyway, so he didn't mention it. "Be prepared, by the way, there will definitely be someone else there. She always does this, lures people in and has a teammate to fight with her." Shinso pondered that for a moment, and responded, "Who do you think it might be? Based on previous experiences? Minoma, Prof. Maybe Kendo or Tetsu. She doesn't team up with someone unless she can plan with them, and she likes Minoma the most." There's jealousy and bitterness in Owaze's tone, and Shinso looked at him curiously. "Yeah, but you know they're just friends, right?" Owaze just grunted, so Shinso continued. "As in, Minoma-kun doesn't like girls." "What, sheet? Had Minoma not told anyone yet?" "Oh, nothing I guess. If he hasn't said anything then I'm probably wrong." Owaze was unconvinced and he smiled. "So he and Tokage-san aren't into each other then. That's good. Did people think that? Were people supposed to think that?" Either way, as they ran after Tokage's limbs and one of Owaze's bands, they ran in silence. Shinso had never fought with the guy before and he knew he should be making a plan with him, but honestly he didn't want to speak anymore. Why did he say that? The fact that Owaze was worried about Minoma and Tokage proved that he didn't know about that, but Shinso still opened his dumb mouth. Minoma might get targeted or hated even more than he already did because of it, and it would be all Shinso's fault. At least Owaze didn't seem very talkative normally, right? Maybe he won't say anything. Maybe. Hopefully. Probably. They finally reached a building that Tokage's limbs didn't just fly past, and a quick glance showed that there was definitely someone inside. "So, prepare for Minoma, right?" Shinso said, and Owaze scoffed. "You can't really prepare for Minoma, but sure, man. Blondie's full of all kinds of surprises." The last part was barely a whisper said under Owaze's breath, but Shinso still heard it and it made him legitimately worried. Was Owaze homophobic? No, right? They looked through the windows and saw Tokage. Most of her body was still inside the building, but she was facing away, likely so that they couldn't see how much of her face was missing. All of it seems too easy, too perfectly planned, but that's when Minoma stepped out of the shadows. He walked over to her, put his hand on her shoulder as he talked to her from behind, and then slipped out of the back door. That was a perfect opening. He could come back in with Minoma's voice, and she'd respond. He looked at Owaze, who seemed to get the general idea of the plan, so Shinso slid his voice modulator up over his face and turned the dials on the side to sound like Minoma. "Hey, Tokusen, how long do dash?" Tokage whipped around and parts of her limbs shot off toward him, flying around, knocking into him and making it basically impossible to move. Minoma dashed through the door, and two metallic hands broke through the flurry and rip off two of his tags, brushing his hands, then moved back and take the other two. Shinso was trying to use his capture weapon, but every time he lifted an arm a piece of Tokage slammed into it and knocked it to the side. He couldn't get a steady shot. Flurry of pieces parted for just a second, and Minoma walked through the gap and raised a metallic fist. Suddenly Owaze was between them, taking the hit and staggering back slightly. The pieces of Tokage and Minoma form some kind of weird smokescreen, and the two heroes in training dart out of the back door, weaving away between buildings with pieces of themselves trailing behind. God damn it. That was absolutely terrible. It really was just too easy for them. Minoma supposedly had Tokage's, Tetsu's, Owaze, and Shinsu's quirks to mess with. That was pretty much a full spectrum of surveillance, attack, defense, and capture quirks. Plus, if their sports festival strategy was anything to go off of, they'd probably camp out for the rest of the match with their 8 collective bands and their annoyingly in-sync brains. Should we get out of here? Try and get some other bands? We only have 10 minutes-ish. Yeah, we should hide. Grab people when they get singled out to pick up tags. The two of them ran in the opposite direction, And Shinso huffed to himself in frustration. No more half-baked plans. Monoma and Tokage were living the life, honestly. Their tags were secured to their costumes with a Waze quirk, and there was no sign of anybody anywhere near them. They kept running between buildings, eyes and ears moving around to check inside buildings and around corners for danger. With Tokage's lizard tail splitter, Shinsu's brainwashing, Tetsu's steel, and Away's welding, Monoma was pretty much guaranteed to make it to the end of the match. They'd both picked up one more tag each from unsuspecting people camping in buildings when people begin to take notice of them again and start to crowd together. Tokage moved an eye up to look around the entire arena and had to bring it down immediately as Tsuburaba started using his quirk to climb up into the sky. Monoma and Tokage could feel people closing in on their location, and with the amount of tags they had, they were prime targets. Maybe we shouldn't have drawn attention to ourselves, Nito-kun. No, don't worry, Setsuna-chan. This is completely fine, we just need to keep moving until time runs out. They can't remove our tags without a lot of effort since they're attached to our costumes now, so we should probably come in first, considering there are only 11 other tags to be shared between 19 other students. Tokage nodded and the two of them separate into a few pieces, floating them all up onto the roof of a building. Once they had a general idea of where everyone was, they got back down to avoid being spotted. Should only be a couple of minutes. We can rest for a second and then we should keep moving. That way they won't have the chance to sneak up on us or surround us. Tokage nodded again, and after they both caught their breath they kept maneuvering between buildings. 1 minute left, Monoma discovered when he looked down at the time remaining of his quirks. They were running, and after a moment of deliberation they decided to split up, that way if one of them was somehow cornered, the other would still win. It had only been a few seconds since they separated when he heard her call out. Monoma-kun. Something is not right about that. Monoma stopped and looked in the direction that the voice had come from. He opened his mouth to speak when, alright, Shinso exists. Tokage called him by his first name, that must be Shinso. And even if it wasn't, they had agreed to separate, Tokage definitely wouldn't call out, she would want him to stay away. So he snapped his mouth shut and kept moving, when he felt a long strap of fabric wrap around his waist and pull him back. Well, he could hardly compete with that. He smacked into Shinso and the purple-haired boy was knocked back, tripping over his own capture scarf and making the two fall to the ground, tangled up together. Monoma's back was flat on top of the taller teen's chest, and the capture scarf held his hands tight to his sides, rendering him definitely immobile. On the bright side, he was able to brush a finger against the side of Shinso's hand and renew his power, so if he tried to speak then Monoma could grab him. Shinso must have realized that, because he said nothing and lay completely still underneath the blonde. Monoma craned his head to try and look at the other teen, only catching a glimpse of peachy skin before deciding that maybe, just maybe, he was silent for a different reason. Monoma struggled against the fabric and tried to push it off of him, which only ended up making him push down harder into Shinso, drawing a pained wheeze from him as Monoma's elbow dug into his stomach. Instead, Monoma leaned and pulled the scarf, flipping them onto their sides and giving him enough slack to turn around inside the ropes. He planned to get a look at the tangle and figure out how to get out, but when he met Shinso's gaze, only a few inches from his own, all his plans tumbled out of his head. Shinso was clutching his stomach slightly, and his voice was pained when he spoke. I still need more practice with this thing. Monoma just eyed Shinso suspiciously, and the other teen sighed. I'm not gonna brainwash you. At least, not until we get out of this dumb thing. Monoma didn't believe him, so he just nodded and started to eye the scarf, looking for the end so that he could unwrap them. As he shifted around to try and find it, he heard Shinsu's breath hitch, and looked back up to realize he had subconsciously pressed a hand against the other teen's upper stomach. His surprisingly firm stomach, he has definitely been training a lot over the holidays. Monoma was almost tempted to keep his hand there, but pulled it away to sort through the mess of fabric that held him instead. His shoulder was hurting from lying on it, damn it, and he needed to go before Shinso changed his mind about the brainwashing thing. When he found the end of the scarf, he began to unweave it from where it was held, straining his arms as much as he could to try and bring it around his back, but to no avail. He huffed and sorted through his quirks to see what he could do. He could split apart and slowly slide out piece by piece, maybe. He could try brute forcing his way out with Tetsu's quirk, but that probably won't work. Away's quirk would only make the problem worse, and Shinsu's quirk couldn't really help either. Doesn't Eraserhead carry a knife for this? You should have one. He blanked on the fact that Shinso could have been actively trying to brainwash him at that moment, momentarily relieved by the fact that he wasn't, and the purple-haired boy nodded. Oh yeah, I have one, it's his face drained of color as he looked Monoma in the eyes, fidgeting in place. What? Shinso shifted, trying in a last-ditch attempt to pull his hands from where they're wrapped up in front of him, and went slack. He sighed defeatedly, averting his gaze from Monoma and closing his eyes awkwardly. It's in my back pocket. The back pocket? Of Shinsu's skin-tight black hero suit, huh? Right on his. Monoma swallowed and looked at Shinsu's hands, which were still very much tied up at his front. Monoma nodded his head and wiggled his arms, slipping them between Shinsu's arms and his torso and reaching down to his butt. Well, this wasn't the way I planned to do this for the first time, but whatever. He took a deep breath and pressed his hands onto Shinsu's lower back, sliding slowly, painstakingly slowly, down and down until Monoma felt the tense muscle underneath. His fingertips. He kept moving down, and Shinso was deathly still and pressed really close to him so that Monoma could reach, and his hands were definitely halfway down his, but by now so where the hell was that pocket? Monoma could feel Shinsu's heartbeat against his chest and hoped that his own wasn't as sporadic, but he knew it was because he could hear it jackhammering in his ears. The second he felt the thin lip of the pocket, he jerked his other hand away, and had to press his hand harder into Shinsu's, but to slide his fingers into the pocket that was definitely way too tight, Shinso needed to work on his costume design. He sunk his hand quickly down into the pocket, and his fingertips met the cold wooden handle of what was probably a switchblade. He grabbed it and pulled his hand away so fast he almost hurt his wrist from the whiplash, sliding his arms free, flicking out the blade and sawing through the capture weapon haphazardly. He was definitely destroying it more than necessary, but that was what Shinso deserved for trying to catch him with it. Unbelievable. You're unbelievable, you know that, right? Monoma muttered as he sawed through piece after piece of the fabric, finally cutting enough of it to allow himself to roll away and get back on his feet. He closed the switchblade and glared at the team that was still dazed on the ground, wrapped in gray fabric on his side like an idiot. An idiot with a really good butt, his brain thought before he could stop it, and he physically stepped back at the betrayal. Shinso was still lying completely immovable on the floor, and Monoma definitely didn't want to deal with that, so he turned on his heel and stalked away. He tried to maintain his dignity, or the tiny shred he had left after JRPG Shinso on the floor of a training arena, but it was completely shattered when Shinso cleared his throat and spoke weakly. Can I have my knife back? Monoma looked down at the blade that was still in his hand, and slid it closed before chucking it on the ground next to where Shinso was finally starting to get up. If Monoma didn't know any better, he'd say Shinso was in full gay panic mode. Monoma whipped around to see Shinso, eyes wide, visibly shaken, gripping his capture weapon and his knife and just sitting on the floor. He was staring daggers into the ground, and when he looked up and met Monoma's gaze, he visibly faltered for a moment before clearing his throat again and standing all the way. Oh, that's practically textbook gay panic. Sorry, he said, and then turned and walked away before Monoma had a chance to reply. God, that was the worst. He turned and was just about to resume running away when the alarm sounded, signaling the end of the round. Monoma and Tokage won this round. They had 5 tags each and both managed to keep their own. Tokage's hand nudged against his own in the crowd, and he subtly spread his palm so that she could high-five him. It was a sign of trust for them, like in a, I'm letting you take my power because we are equals, kind of way. Vlad King continued to give advice on the match, and Monoma was happy when he sent them to reset without mentioning anything about what happened at the end of the round. They all returned their tags with quite a bit of effort from Tokage, Aways and Monoma, and then were handed new ones. As they were leaving, Glad King gave them one last instruction for their final match. Final rule, no teaming up this round. You're all on your own. Monoma shot a look to Tokage, and they both made a face at each other before splitting up to go to their new positions. He arrived at his post with his new light pink tag wrapped firmly around his bicep. As he looked around, he spotted a glimpse of a white flag waving in the air, and decided to get out of Dodge as fast as possible until he knew who it was. For all he knew, Bondo or Fukudashi could be waiting just down the street, ready to take him down with a single attack. The alarm sounded, and Monoma did in fact get the F out of Dodge. And by that he meant, of course, that he completely failed to dodge when none other than Shinso Hitoshi himself ran down the street. The purple-haired idiot with the white tag was looking behind himself instead of forwards like he should have been, and the two of them collided after Monoma's last-ditch attempt at a sidestep failed. At least they didn't fall over. Monoma felt Shinso's quirk added to the list in his mind, and immediately whipped around to make a grab for the tag, but he missed. Shinso darted backward and seemed to assess his opponent momentarily, and that was all Monoma needed to dart forward again, punching Shinso in the stomach and then taking advantage of his recoil to tear the tag from his arm. He heard a grunt from Shinso, and he started running. He tried to turn and run into a building, but that plan was immediately foiled when the tattered remains of the capture scarf wrapped around him. The pullback was slower the second time around, as if Shinso was trying to make sure they didn't have a repeat of last match, so Monoma just let himself be dragged back. When he returned, Shinso spun him around to face him and looked at him for a moment. What? Shinso looked like he wanted to say something, looking Monoma over again and biting his lip nervously. Nothing, I dash. No, what? Monoma felt the control in the back of his mind, like someone was pouring warm water into his skull. It would feel smooth and relaxing, if not for the connotations of the quirk. Give me your tags, Shinso demanded, and Monoma robotically pulled the tags off of his arm and handed them to Shinso. The purple-haired teen still looked at him like he wanted to speak, but he shook his head slightly instead. Run away from me. Monoma's body took off down the street, weaving between buildings, but being completely unable to turn back in Shinso's direction. About half a block away the control was lifted, and Monoma cursed. God damn it. Now he'd have to work twice as hard to get enough tags back. For the rest of the exercise, Monoma stayed in the shadows, confronting his less aware classmates as they ran past him and picking up their quirks. He ended up pretty bruised and battered. Most of the time he got quirks by simply taking a punch, but he also had 3 tags, which he counted as a win considering he got them all completely on his own. The connotation that he only worked well with a teammate upset him. He wasn't anyone's sidekick, but he shook it off. Everyone did better with a partner. It wasn't any kind of reflection on his character. Vlad King gave them their praise and their criticism. None of it was particularly groundbreaking for Monoma, and so they moved on to their next class uninterrupted. For the entirety of their science class, Monoma could feel Shinso staring at his back, but as much as the itch on his neck was annoying him, he couldn't turn around to confront it. So when Vlad returned for their new personal care class and instructed them to pair up into groups of 2 or 3, Monoma stood and sat on Shinso's desk, leaning on his arm and looking down at the other teen provocatively. We're pairing up, he said, leaving no room for objection. Shinso just fidgeted in his seat, clearly trying to quell the slight blush on his face. Okay, he responded quietly, and Monoma grinned, spinning slightly to face the front and grin at their teacher. It's Suka-chan. Be in a 3 with us. Monoma called, but Kendo just shook her head and pointed her thumb at Tetsu. Tokage, however, wasn't occupied, and shot her hand into the air just as Awaze was about to tap her on the shoulder. I'll be in a 3 with you. She winked unsubtle at them and dashed forward, leaning down to whisper into the blonde's ear. I'm a great wing woman. She pulled back and grinned as Monoma shoved her playfully. Awaze narrowed his eyes, upper lip quirking into a slight scowl, and moved across the classroom, tapping Tsunatori on the shoulder instead. She was bright, happy, and unaware of Japanese culture, so Monoma found it strange that the tense, tight-lipped, foul-mouthed Awaze wanted to pair up with her. She was also regarded as the class gossip. Her unfamiliarity with Japanese customs meant that she's much louder and more accidentally disrespectful. She spoke like a stereotypical American, yabbering on about everything she knew to anyone who would listen, but Monoma didn't think that was related to the situation. Monoma scooted over on Shinso's desk and Tokage sat next to him, Shinso just groaning and standing up so that he could see over them. Now that you're in pairs or groups of 3, we will be working with emotional support. It is important for all of you to have people that you can trust, so for your first lesson in personal care, you'll be learning how to take care of each other during crisis. There were mixed reactions from the class, and Vlad King held up a hand. You might not think it is important, but as students and as heroes, you will go through a lot of stress in your lives. There's nothing worse than having nobody to talk to, or having too many people trying to comfort you in ways that just make you feel worse. By the end of this exercise, you'll have 1 or 2 people that know exactly what you need when you're under pressure, so that they will be able to support you when you need it. The reactions were more positive this time, and it did make sense. Hero work was stressful, from dealing with villains to even just the general classwork, and Monoma often found himself being suffocated or isolated when he was stressed. All he really wanted was 1 or 2 friends, a good hug, some good food and a distraction to help him unwind and regain his focus, and it would be good for people to know that. Kendo and Tokage already knew that, but having Shinso in his comfort group would be. The mental image of cuddling up to the taller teen and watching a movie appeared for a millisecond in his head before he was able to cut it out, but it left him slightly disorientated when he looked at Shinso and realized how much he would like that. So, pick a person to go first. You have an hour of class left, so take your time, this is about strengthening bonds. I'll go, Tokage said, and the boys just nodded at her. When I'm stressing over schoolwork or upset about something, I like to talk to my friends, specifically Nito. I need someone to rationalize things for me, and Nito is the king of making things seem like they aren't a big deal. He's also a really good cook, he knows how to make all these French meals and pastries and stuff. Shin, so you have to let him cook for you sometime. Tokage rambled, and Monoma waved her off. The girl slapped his hand down and glared at him, but the slight smile tugging at her lips indicated that she was kidding. Don't you dare try to undersell yourself, Nito-kun. You know, if you were into girls I would be all over you, just saying. A total catch, she said, inspecting her nails as if what she had said wasn't a big deal. She looked up and locked eyes with Shinso, grinning wildly. He's so compassionate, Shinso. Last year when I was stressing over a paper for our final assessments, it was meant to be like 5 pages and it was due the next day and I hadn't gotten anything done, I was lying on my bed and bawling my eyes out. Monoma recalled the story and sighed. Sure, it might paint him in a good light, but that didn't mean he needed everyone to know about it. Nito heard me through the door, and he gathered Tetsu and Itsuka and Yui and Tsuburaba and they all came into my room, and Nito made hot chocolate, and they all sat down with me and played games and talked with me while Nito-kun and Itsuka-chan helped me write the essay. Then, when I was completely tired out and drained and starved for affection, he stayed in my bed and let me hug him until I fell asleep, even though being close to people makes him uncomfortable. Shinso looked at Monoma with wide eyes, and the blonde rolled his eyes, trying to keep his composure. He completely failed when Tokage continued to talk. Do you know why that is, Shinso? It's because people would always be mad or scared of him when he got close because they didn't want him to take their quirk, so he was subconsciously scared of being near people, but he let me hug him and lie on him anyway. He's the biggest sweetheart, he'll do anything for pretty much everyone in the class. Monoma had had enough of the stream of compliments, and waved his hands in front of his face nervously. I just want everyone to succeed, is that so weird? Everyone in this class has worked super hard to get here, and they're still working to get further every day, they deserve to have help when they ask for it. Monoma was trying to justify his actions and make it seem less interesting, but the fondness in Shinso's eyes when their gazes met made it clear that his justification only made himself more endearing. Although, Shinso thinking that he is endearing wouldn't exactly be a bad thing. Setsuna-chan, you've just been talking about me the whole time. The task was to say what you need when you're upset, he reminded, so Tokage just sighed and considered that for a moment. Depends on the situation, I think. I think what I want is just for someone to come up to me and ask, do you want to talk about it, fix it, or be distracted from it, and then help me do whatever answer I give. Like if I just want to vent about something, or if I want someone to beat me at a video game, or if I want someone to help me with an essay, it would be nice for a person to be willing to ask and then do that for me. She grinned, facing back directly to Shinso, and spoke again. Yeah, no, Nito has always been able to tell which one I wanted without even asking me, and he always knows exactly the perfect way to accomplish any of the things I want. He's beat me at Mario Kart too many times to count. Shinsu's eyes widened, and he grinned at Monoma. Oh, I'll have to challenge you to a game sometime. You know, I was the reigning champion in general studies. Monoma adopted his cockiest smirk and looked down at Shinso, who was sitting back in his chair. Sure. It will be fun to ruin someone who's so sure of themselves. Shinso held his gaze defiantly, until Tokage spoke in a cheeky stage whisper. Kankiwai. Both boys immediately flushed red and whipped away from each other, and Monoma smacked Tokage upside the head. Setsuna-chan, honestly you need to stop. Itsuka would be disappointed. Monoma scolded, trying to hold on to his last ounce of dignity, and Tokage waggled a finger at him. No, I think Itsuka-chan would be very proud. Tokage grinned, and Monoma buried his face in his hands so he wouldn't have to admit that she was right. Okay, Nito-kun, why don't you go next? Tell us what you want when you're stressed out. Monoma cleared his throat, contemplating for a moment. Well, unlike Setsuna, I don't leave things to the last minute, so I don't think I ever want someone to help me with whatever is stressing me out. I think. He looked down at Shinso, who met his eyes curiously. The blonde liked his lips that had suddenly gotten dry. I think what I want is just for someone to remove me from the situation, hold me, and then do something relaxing with me until I'm back in the right mindset. I always feel calmer and ready to focus again after one of the others takes me into one of their dorms, let me put on some French movie that they don't understand, and just like, braid my hair and let me lie on them and eat snacks on their bed for a couple of hours. Tokage had a hand pressed to her chest, faking a sniffle as she wiped her finger under her eye. That's so pure, Nito-kun. You're such a sweetheart. Monoma turned to Shinso, who was staring straight ahead, slightly wide-eyed but otherwise blank-faced and lost in thought. What about you, Shinso-kun? What helps you de-stress? Shinso cleared his throat and avoided their gazes. It was clear that he wasn't used to or comfortable with letting people know things about him. I don't really have much experience with other people helping me to calm down, but I think what Monoma-kun said sounds nice. When I'm stressed I usually just listen to music and lie down, but I think someone just sitting with me and letting me mess with their hair or talk about basically nothing or listen to music together would be really nice. So the two of them really just wanted what their quirks denied them, huh? Monoma wanted to be able to have someone near him calmly and casually be in contact with a person without them fearing that he was going to turn their power against them. He wanted to be held as if the very act of touching him wasn't putting someone in danger. And Shinso just wanted to talk. He wanted to talk and he wanted to listen to someone without them cutting off sentences or fearing that he'd take over their mind. They both just wanted someone to be comfortable around them and to act as if they're a regular person, not like being near them is scary and dangerous. So you two could totally comfort each other. You know, after a test or whatever if you need to unwind, you can just relax together and talk and listen to music and mess with each other's hair. That's adorable. Hey, a little far, Tokage. The three of them talked about basically nothing for the rest of class, and when the bell rung, they were all closer and more comfortable. Monoma went off ahead, but Tokage stayed behind to continue talking to Shinso. I like you, Shinso. And I know Nito has said that to you before, but he likes you in a different way. You seem reliable and honest, but if you ever do anything to actually mess with Class B's Blondie, you will have hell to pay. Pretty much everyone loves him, just so you know. Shinso fidgeted uncomfortably, and then looked across the room to see Tsunatori whispering to Komori conspiratorially. What were they talking about? Probably their partners. Tsunatori was with Aways, wasn't she? And she's from America, the class gossip, it would make sense. Komori did look pretty shocked though, didn't she? They stood and walked over to the door, huddling close to Yael Tsuburaba as they left the room with everyone else. Monoma went ahead to change and meet those first years, didn't he? Monoma Suways. Oh no. God, please no. Just as Tokage turned to leave the room, Shinso grabbed her arm in a panic. Tokage, I did something. I think something really bad is happening right now. I'm so sorry, Tokage looked genuinely panicked, her face no doubt mirroring what she saw on his own, and he sighed. Look, I didn't mean to, okay? I thought everyone knew and Awaze-kun seemed super jealous over you and Monoma-kun, so I might have mentioned the Thwasge. And I think he told Tsunatori. He explained almost illegibly, hoping stupidly that she wouldn't pick it up, but she stiffened. You what? Huh. She must have picked up a lot more of that than Shinso had thought she would. I told Awaze-kun that Monoma-kun is gay. I thought the whole class knew already, and he seemed like he was jealous of you two being close, so I just said but he doesn't like girls, but he didn't know, and then he was just partnered with Tsunatori-san in class, who was just whispering to Komori-san, and then they both started talking to Tsuburaba-kun, and I think they might be about to tell everyone. Tokei's gaze became steelier than Tetsu's entire body as he spoke, and when he finished her hand detached from her wrist and slapped him. Seriously, Shinso-kun? Do you know why it's a secret? His dad is crazy homophobic and neglectful. If he found out, then Nito-kun will be put in a conversion camp or left homeless or something. We have to go monitor it. I'm going to text Itsuka. The girl whirled around and pulled out her phone, fingers flying over the screen. She whipped back to look at him, eyes angry and determined. Don't think you're getting off so easy, she snarled, and then rushed out of the room. After messaging Kendo, she pulled out the contact for the blonde in question and sent a simple message. Tokei, are you still in the dorms? Monoma, I'm just about to leave. Why? Tokei, get out of there now. Shinso told, the others and I will deal with it, but you might not want to stick around in case things go bad. Tokei stuffed her phone into her pocket and raced toward the dorms at record speed, running into Monoma a minute away from the building. He looked worried and scared, and he was fidgeting and shuffling his feet, and Tokei wrapped him in a tight hug. I'm so sorry, Nito-kun. We will get through it, don't worry. I'll tell you when it's safe to come back. We'll fix it, I promise. The blonde just nodded, and Tokei ran to the dorms with one last reassuring smile. As she broke through the door, she was met with exactly the sight she was afraid of, her entire class out in the common room, looking at Tsunatori in shock and talking loudly amongst themselves. Hey, guys, it's still the exact same Monoma Nito that we've known for over a year. Why does it matter? Kendo reasoned, but some of the guys step up to her. He uses the boys' change rooms though. What if he has been checking us out while we're half naked or something? Nito would never dash, Kendo tried, but she was interrupted. It's a bit unsettling, isn't it? I mean, how would you feel if one of us was just allowed to change in the girls' change room? Wouldn't you be uncomfortable knowing that we might be looking at you or something? Kendo tried to speak, another student objected, and it broke out into chaos. Everyone! Seriously, this isn't a topic for debate. It's who Nito is, and if you can't accept a person for the way they are born, then you shouldn't be in the hero course. Kendo demanded, and while a few people seemed to gain awareness and agree, a few others just pushed back harder. I'm not, homophobic or anything, but I feel like he should have told us. I would have wanted to know, because I wouldn't have dash. You all treating him differently is exactly what he doesn't want. Come on guys, it shouldn't matter. Nito is our friend, he's practically a leader in this group, on or with Kaibara and I. I know for a fact that he's helped every person in this room with their English homework. He cooks full meals for us whenever we're too busy with assignments to make food ourselves. He encourages us and uses his quirk to help us learn to use our own. The people he may or may not like doesn't change that. He's an outstanding person. Kendo ranted, and once again a few people agreed, but a few of the others kept arguing. Tokei realized that it wasn't a matter of having a convincing argument. Everyone would believe what they wanted to believe. Yeah, but what if one of those people he likes is one of us? Someone said from the back of the crowd. Tokei had had enough of watching, and spoke out in the conversation that had practically been Kendo versus 3 different guys until that point. And what if he liked one of us? It's a thing that happens, it shouldn't be any different from if he liked a girl, Tokei said, exasperated, but they just shook their heads. But at least if he liked a girl, the girl would like him back. You're all obsessed with him and sheet, Awaze interjected, and just before Tokei was about to send her hand over there and slap him, someone else cleared their throat. Who says all the girls are straight? Kodai interrupted quietly, and Tokei welcomed the addition to their side with a sigh of relief. Hearing her voice speak more than a single word was almost jarring, but if there was ever an occasion to speak, it was absolutely right then. "What, are you not?" Fukudashi asked, seemingly innocently, and Kodai shrank back out of the conversation. "Not the point. And I can't speak for all of us anyway. Come on guys, it isn't manly to judge somebody because of one thing that they can't control. Especially after he's done so much for us." The argument continued and more people made their opinions known, Tokage being brought closer and closer to tears each time someone spoke against Monoma. By the end of the confrontation, the class had split into 3 distinct groups. Those who had adamantly shown their support for Monoma, Tokage, Kendo, Kodai, Tetsu, and Tsunatori. Those who hadn't made their opinions known, Kurwaro, Komori, Rin, Hananuki, Kaibara, Shishida, Bando, Shouda, Fukudashi, and Yanagi. They had all either not said anything, argued both sides, or had made comments like, "I don't know, I think it's," or, "It's just a bit weird because," that Tokage knew weren't inherently negative, but couldn't be trusted to welcome Monoma when he returned. And those who had spoken against Monoma, Kamakiri, Shiozaki, Awaze, and Tsuburaba. Not all of them had necessarily said that they disliked him for it, pretty much only Shiozaki expressed distaste for his lifestyle, but they had all acted in a way that proved to Tokage that the idea of Monoma being gay made them uncomfortable, and they all wanted there to be consequences for something that Monoma couldn't change. The people who were for Monoma ended up moving up to the 4th floor, and everyone else avoided that floor for the rest of the night. Monoma hadn't texted her yet, but it had been an hour and he probably was nearly done with training those first-year students. She decided to send him an update of the situation, and then the group sat in silence. "What are we going to do? Poor Nito, the majority of class hasn't had a positive reaction, how are we going to even get him back in here?" Tokage had her face buried in her hands, clutching at her hair before habitually putting it up in a braid, just to have something to do with her hands. "Hey, where's Shinsukuin? Wasn't he the whole cause of this in the first place?" Kendo said, and Tokage frowned. "I'm gonna check the other floors." A chunk of her head containing an eye and an ear separated from the rest of her and got into the elevator, slamming into every button on the panel as the doors closed. Kurwaro's in his room, so is Yanagi on the 5th. Nobody on 3rd, Kaibara and Rin are in their rooms on 2nd, everyone else is gathered in the common room. "No Shinso to be seen," she reported dutifully, and the atmosphere within the small group dropped even further. The group waited for hours, and when Vlad King made the rounds to get them all into their rooms, Shinso reappeared just in time. When their teacher asked where Monoma was, Kenda bit her lip nervously. "He's already in his room, Vlad-sensei. He felt unwell and went to sleep about an hour ago." The teacher just nodded, and his students all filed into their rooms. He knew something was up, and he trusted that the students on this floor, or most of them, were capable of sorting it out. The students here had the most influence on the rest of the class, after all. And if they were unable to solve the problem, they would come to him when the time was right. Vlad King wasn't expecting the right time to be so soon, as Kenda met him in the classroom 15 minutes before classes started, worrying her bottom lip between her teeth, a nervous habit she had picked up from Monoma in recent weeks. "Sir, I haven't been entirely honest with you about Nito's situation. There's been a bit of tension in the class after something about him was revealed, and I don't want to say what it is, but it isn't bad, just controversial apparently. He wasn't in the dorm at curfew. I think he snuck back in just before everyone started to wake up this morning, so he will be in class. As class representative, I would just like to bring up the fact that now wouldn't be a great time to pair Nito with someone outside of our circle, because it will lead to the situation being potentially dangerous for him." She spoke evenly, but she was avoiding eye contact and wringing her hands the entire time she spoke. "Something controversial, hey? Surely it won't be that bad." Just as they were speaking, a group of students came in. Tetsu, Kodai, Tokage, Kaibara and Shouda, accompanied by a Monoma who looked more shaken than Vlad had ever seen him in his life. Then, the next group of students, Shiozaki, Awaze, and Tsuburaba, all people who were generally close to Monoma, who shot him upset or uncertain looks before sitting in their seats to face away from him. Shinso walked in looking even more tired than usual, was glared at by Minoma's closest friends, and then by the second group too, and sat in his seat and stared out the window, occasionally glancing at Minoma. Nobody spoke, they barely moved, and Vlad King decided to take Kendo's advice. He made a mental note to talk to Aizawa about that kid of his. Successor, prodigy, trainee, whatever. Take your seat, Kendo-san, class will start soon. When everyone else started to get back into the dorms, Minoma could feel that it was tense. He was about to go find the source, when he received a text from Tokage. The secret's out, you're out, you should get out before things get crazy, was basically what it said, and Minoma obediently slung his bag over his shoulder and did the walk of shame through the common room and out of the door. He could feel their looks and hear their muttering, so he just walked faster, gripping the strap of his bag harder and leaning into the door to open it. Once he was out, he curved around to get to the 1A dorms, and ran into Tokage as she came back in a full sprint. She crashed into him, hugging him tightly and murmuring apologies and promises into his ear before pushing him to keep moving. He did, walking backwards away from the dorm and watching as his friend burst through the door, Kendo's voice echoing out through the slight opening before everything fell silent again. Minoma took a deep breath. He had training to do, and those first years didn't have anything to do with all of his drama. There were people who look up to him for once, and he didn't want to spoil that by dragging them into something that was his fault. He arrived at the 1A dorms, tapping on the door before he stepped in. He had grown a couple of inches, and was tall enough that he felt mature when he came face to face with the group of first years. They all looked at him and fell silent. One group that had been stuffing their faces yelped and threw a bag of chips over the couch. Minoma chuckled slightly. Minoma-senpai. Why, what brings you here? Minoma just stepped forward, slipping his hands into the pockets of his baggy sweatpants and smirking casually. You can relax, I'm not here to monitor you. It's the first day of the rest of your lives, kids, enjoy it. Minoma really liked being older than them, he felt strong and mysterious. The tension in the room relaxed slightly, just as Hamada Akira ran into the room, hopping over the piles of school jackets and food on the ground and coming to a halt in front of Minoma. Senpai. Sorry, Isaac and Doman are still getting ready. Minoma just nodded and looked around the room. The first years were lying around the room, they looked awkward around each other and by the looks of it, none of them had touched the kitchen. Minoma sighed and looked in the fridge. It started fully stocked. There were eggs and milk and various vegetables and meats, everything he could need to make something for the unprepared students. Tell them not to rush. You people need actual food. The rest of the students perked up at that, a few of them joining him in the kitchen. How about I teach you how to make katsudon? It's pretty easy and a relatively well-balanced meal, it'll be valuable for some of you to know. The students nodded, and Minoma rifled through the fridge and pulled out the ingredients he would need. Half an hour later, 20 15-year-olds were sat around the room, digging into the food that Minoma and a few of their classmates had made. As they ate, Minoma wrote a few easy-to-follow recipes for quick, healthy meals and attacked them to the fridge with magnets. I didn't know you would be so organized, Minoma-senpai. Minoma thought back to his childhood. Learning how to be perfectly organized from his father and then being left to do almost everything alone. His sister had taught him to cook and clean and organize the kitchen and the study and the bedrooms, as well as rubbing off some of her caring and helpful personality onto him. Really, he was perfectly developed to be a caretaker. Yeah, I learned how to do a lot of this stuff as a kid, he replied simply, straightening out the notes on the fridge, including another one that listed where everything was to be kept. When they had all finished, Minoma loaded 20 bowls into the dishwasher and sent every one of the first years to change out of their uniforms. You need to keep them clean, and you need to keep yourselves organized. If you wear your uniform when you're in the dorms, you won't be able to relax properly, he explained, and another 10 minutes later most of them returned in comfortable clothing and Minoma put on a movie. Minoma looked at the clock, 6:13 p.m. Okay, I'm going to train. Any of you are welcome to come along. I'll be back in 2 hours, and you will all need to go to sleep. In the end, only the original 5 first years joined him to train, and he was perfectly happy with that. Are we going to fight you, The first years all looked at each other, and the bolder three Doman, Hamada, and Kawasaki grinned and nodded fiercely. Okay, you can go one by one, that way I'll be able to focus on your quirk abilities individually. Don't expect me to hold back, though, you're only 1 year behind. They arrived at the training ground that Monoma had been allowed to use, and he turned to look at his underclassmen. So, who would like to go first? When Tokij ran off, Shinso didn't think he would be allowed to follow. So he didn't, instead wandering around school grounds for almost an hour before he bumped into Midoriya. Shinso-kun, how was your first day? Shinso just grunted, still not ready to forgive him for the confrontation between classes earlier in the day. Midoriya probably guessed that, and he sighed nervously. Look, we're all really sorry for the things that were said earlier today. Most of the class doesn't share Kaken's sentiments and Todoroki-kun didn't mean for that to sound the way it did. Then it was Shinsu's turn to sigh, and he contemplated using his quirk to send Midoriya away, before deciding that it would just cause more trouble in the long run. How about you come and hang out in our dorm? That is if you aren't going to yours right now or anything. Midoriya stuttered, and Shinso thought about it. What exactly did he want? He wanted to apologize to Monoma, but the blonde definitely wouldn't want to see him. He wanted to go collapse onto his bed, but he couldn't do that with the discourse that is happening there. Who else did he really have? That's closet speak for, I think you're hot. He could talk to Kaminari, the guy was an idiot and annoying, but he'd be able to distract Shinso from his problem until he was actually able to do something about it. Sure, I guess. Midoriya beamed at him and the two set out to the 2A dorms, Midoriya holding the door open for Shinso when they arrived. Oi, what's that mind freak doing here? Isn't he in shitty class B? Bakugo was the first to speak up, and the rest of the students whipped around to look at him, most notably, Kaminari. Shinso, it's good to see you. What's the occasion? The occasion is that we all need to apologize. Midoriya cut in, and the rest of the class's faces dulled slightly. Yes, we do. Yaoyorozu spoke up, standing and walking over to him calmly. Her hair was in a ponytail, but it hung loose and flat down her back. I wonder how much effort she puts into making it spike like that? Shinso-kun, we all want to apologize. What was said was dash. Shinso cut her off by raising a hand, and she fell silent. It's nice of you to apologize, but you've already said all of this stuff. If anyone needs to apologize, it's Bakugo and Todoroki, and they should be apologizing to the rest of the school, not to me. I'm not going to accept your apology because it just proves what Monoma said earlier, that you only concern yourselves with the people that are beneficial to you. Yaoyorozu slumped and nodded solemnly, while Bakugo just got more angry. Like hell I would apologize to those extras. I'm here to be number one, not to make friends with useless brats. He scowled, and Todoroki put a hand on Midoriya's shoulder, stage whispering to him. Is that really what I sounded like? Midoriya giggled slightly and playfully shoved him away as Bakugo fixed the heterochromic teen with a glare that would probably kill a weaker soul. Todoroki just raised an eyebrow at the blonde and then smiled slightly down at Midoriya. If you didn't come here to accept our apology, then why did you come? Shinso debated being honest. On one hand, it would lead to him outing Monoma to even more people, which was absolutely out of the question. On the other, he couldn't think of a good enough excuse. He looked around the room, gaze meeting that of a pair of angular golden eyes, and he smiled to himself. I want to talk to Kaminari, actually. Ashido squealed, and that all but confirmed Monoma's suspicions from earlier. So Kaminari really was into him, and what's more, he told Ashido about it. Interesting. Oh. Come up to my room. The blonde said, and Shinso just nodded, getting into the elevator alongside Kaminari. The second the doors closed, he could feel the awkward silence wrap around them. Only for a second though, because Kaminari started speaking. So how was your first day? I didn't do anything over the holidays and we had hero training, so now I'm so sore. I wanted to go up to the roof today too, but I don't think I'm physically strong enough to get up there. He laughed, and then looked to Shinso expectantly. Oh right, there was a question in there, wasn't there? It was okay. Honestly, I kind of messed everything up, that's kind of why I came here. I just don't want to go back to my dorm right now. Kaminari deflated, just slightly, and remained facing the elevator doors when he spoke. So you don't actually have anything to talk to me about? Shinso felt a little guilty, so he turned slightly to look at the blonde and offered him a gentle smile. No, sorry, but I figure you've got a lot to say, and I'm happy to listen to you. Kaminari grinned and turned to meet Shinso's gaze. You're smooth, Shinso-kun. Shinso just let out a breath of a laugh. Maybe he was kinda smooth. He remembered back to the training exercise earlier that day, when Monoma's hands on his but had made him literally crash and spend an embarrassing 20 seconds lying frozen on the floor after the blonde had already freed them. Maybe he was kinda smooth, sometimes. Then he remembered the way the act of Monoma sitting on his desk earlier had made him combust a little bit, and how he could only stare in silence at the taunting gleam in his eye. And that was totally understandable. The guy liked to take situations and flip them on their heads for fun. He was able to take charge of people almost better than Shinso did, without even using a quirk. People trusted him, or they did until he started acting crazy around 1A last year. But still, when Monoma took charge of a situation, people listened to him. Even Shinso felt compelled to just do what he asked of him. It completely threw him for a loop because Shinso was used to having control, or to having people avoid him like a plague. But Monoma just came along and knocked down all his boundaries with a glance, but instead of attacking like Shinso had come to fear, he just passively hung around next to him, and Shinso isn't used to it. That's why Monoma made him flustered. It wasn't anything else. Then Kaminari reached over and grabbed his hand, dragging him out of the elevator and into his room, door slamming loudly behind him. Monoma isn't the only one that can be unreasonably social. Shinso thought, looking down at his hand that was still intertwined with Kaminari's, a dumb expression on his face. Oh, sorry. I didn't mind. Oh. If Shinso hadn't been made aware of Kaminari's interest in him, he would have thought that the blonde had just shocked himself stupid from the expression on his face. He shook himself out of it and grinned his megawatt smile. So, Hero Corps student, would you be willing to carry an innocent, really hot bystander up to the roof? Kaminari said, and Shinso rolled his eyes. But he felt a smile creeping onto his face, and decided if I'm here for a distraction, swooped forward and picked Kaminari up bridal style. Whoa, hey! Kaminari laughed, clutching at Shinso's shoulders as he kicked the door open and went over to the fire escape. You were referring to yourself, weren't you? Or is there another really hot innocent bystander around? Shinso teased, but Kaminari's grin just widened. So you admit that I'm really hot? Kaminari winked, and Shinso looked away to regain his footing for a moment. I'm saying that if there was someone else around that met those requirements, I'd be happy to take them instead. Kaminari shut his mouth comically, looking at Shinso with what he decided must be the happiest eyes he had ever seen. They arrived at the top of the fire escape, now a few meters below the roof. Shinso wiggled his fingers into gaps in the bricks and climbed, and he was all too aware that he was very exposed to Kaminari, who was a few feet directly below him at that moment. Hey, wait. Shinso dropped back down and picked up the school bag that he had left on the ground, fishing his capture weapon out of it. It was very cut up, but there was enough left for him to throw it up, snag it firmly on something on the roof, and then use it to walk himself up the wall. He got to the top, and a minute later Kaminari scrambled over the edge too. So why did you want to come up here? Shinso said, and Kaminari just looked up at the sky. I dunno, it's just nice. I read the weather forecast, and it said that the sky would be pretty clear and that light pollution is low over here, so I wanted to be able to get a good look at the stars. Are you into astronomy? Shinso questioned, and Kaminari didn't even look back at him when he responded. I'm into yorbatronomy if you're asking, but yeah, space is pretty neat. Kaminari's ability to be an absolutely shameless and terrible flirt was pretty incredible, and Shinso couldn't find it in himself to speak. That was fine though, because Kaminari opened his mouth again. Most things are pretty neat though. The ocean is cool in like a scary way, and the sky is cool in a pretty, innocent way, and space is cool in an awesome sparkly way. Different things are cool in different ways, you know? Shinso didn't know, but Kaminari seemed so sure of what he was saying that Shinso couldn't help but find himself agreeing. Most things were pretty neat if he was going to adopt some Kaminari speak. You're pretty neat. In a dumb, cute, electric kinda way. If it wasn't so dark out, Shinso was hoping that he would see Kaminari blush. Then again, if there had been more light, he wouldn't have been able to see the crackles of electricity flying around the spikes of his hair. You're pretty neat too. In a tall, mysterious, hot kinda way. Kaminari replied, turning and looking at Shinso brightly. The electricity under his skin made him glow, and Shinso felt himself sinking into the shadows. Whoa, Kaminari-kun, you're literally glowing. The glow tinted pinkish around his cheeks and he turned away. Yeah, I do that sometimes. Maybe don't touch me right now. Shinso didn't feel like doing what Kaminari said, so he reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. The resulting electrical shock really wasn't much, kind of a pleasant tickle that bit at his fingertips, but Kaminari pulled away. Whoa, hey, are you crazy? Shinso just looked confused. What? It just tickles, it's not like you're going to kill me or anything. He justified, and Kaminari just looked confused. Really? But touch me again. He said determinedly, and Shinso ignored the connotations and put his hand back on Kaminari's shoulder. The tiniest bits of electricity licked at his fingers, but it didn't hurt. Kaminari just shook his head, grabbed Shinso's hand and pressed it to his chest. The electricity was stronger there, and his hands were hurting slightly. Both of those were observations he would have made if he wasn't too busy thinking about the presence of his index finger along the slight crease down the middle of Kaminari's toned chest. Then, Kaminari moved Shinso's hand and pressed it into the side of his face, and it was definitely hurting now. It felt like he was being lightly stabbed with a bunch of needles. Not really all that bad, bearable, but magnified by the shock that was already running through his veins. Kaminari held Shinso's hand on his face, looking him in the eye. Shinso-kun, you're pretty smart, right? Shinso didn't know how to respond to that, but Kaminari kept speaking anyway, removing Shinso's hand from his face and holding it between his own instead. How do you know if you like someone? Like, actually love them, want to date them, or whatever? He was tracing the lines on Shinso's palm with lightly sparking fingers, but Shinso was able to function well enough to think about the question. I think you can't really tell at first when you love someone. At least, that's what I want to say, Shinso said, and Kaminari's eyes met his own again, silently prompting him to go on. Like, you kind of just want to spend time with a person, you find them interesting, and you think that it's pretty normal because you've found plenty of people interesting before them. But then it's after you spend a lot of time with them, and you get to know them, and you've already formed a bond with them when one day you look at them and you think, I could stay here forever. It's after you've seen them at their best and at their worst and you still want to stick with them, and you want them to see you how you are. I think that's when you know you love someone. Kaminari had been watching him intently as Shinso spoke up to the stars, and the blonde nodded. And do you think you love anyone? Shinso released a breath. No, I don't. But I might be getting there, who knows? That's what I mean, I don't think you can really tell until you're already halfway committed. Shinso said, then turned back to Kaminari. What do you think? How do you know you love someone? Their conversation had taken a very existential turn, but Shinso has these thoughts all the time anyway, and it was nice to get them out. Kaminari hummed to himself, dropping Shinso's hand. I would say that the person makes you happy, but I think it's more complicated than that. Because a person could be terrible and disgusting and only ever hurt others, but there are still people who love them, you know. Shinso nodded, and Kaminari leaned back into his hands, dropping into his shoulders in thought. So I think that you know you love someone when you keep denying what people say about them, when you dedicate yourself to them. Sometimes it's good, you know a person well and you care about them and these other people are just trying to be dramatic, but sometimes it makes you blind to how terrible someone can be. I think you know you love someone when you want the best for them, and you support them no matter what they've done. Sometimes they do something too bad and a person can fall out of love, but I think to truly love somebody, you forgive all their past actions. Shinso kind of wanted to ask what events had formed that mildly effed up idea of love, but Kaminari's expression told him not to push it, so for once, he didn't. Then the blonde's face lit up into a mischievous grin. So, Do you have your voice modulator in that bag with you? One by one, the first years approached Monoma, and one by one he took them down. First up was Doman. He was talking immediately, and while Monoma definitely felt the effects of the quirk, moving slower and more sluggishly, and the kid was a quick dodge, he wasn't quick enough. Even without any of his gadgets, Monoma was able to get in next to the kid and hit him as quickly and hopefully as painlessly as possible out of the ring. You need to work on actual fighting. Your quirk is strong, but Hero Course students feel fatigue and incredible pain while they're fighting and still push through, so you need to be able to fight alongside that quirk of yours. Monoma frowned and looked back to the kid. How did you get in, anyway? Surely your quirk would make it impossible to do the entrance exam. Oh really? We must have had different entrance exams then. There were 3 parts, the school part, the battle part, and the strategy and teamwork part. The school part was, well, school. The battle part was fighting a mix of robots and the actors played as villains controlling them, so you could get points from taking down the bots directly, or for stopping the villain from unleashing them. Then for the teamwork part we were put into random pairs. I was with Hiroda, and we just had to talk about how we'd manage different scenarios. We didn't actually have to do it. Doman explained, and the others nodded along. That was way better than what they got. With that test, Shinso could have gotten into the hero course in first year. Huh, I guess they fixed the test then. Okay, who's up next? The hair quirk girl, Hiroda, went next, and that one was more difficult. Because she could not only manipulate her hair, but his as well. She could use it to throw him off balance by growing it out or throwing it around. Her downfall was just a lack of control over him, so she had to use her hair to attack, and that's when he picked up her quirk. His blonde hair grew out into a thick mass, grabbed her, and flung her out of the ring. I really like this quirk, he laughed, using tendrils of hair to pick things up and WHP them around. The girl looked at him in shock. How can you do that? I can only move the entire head of hair together, she explained, and he grinned at her. Well, when I copy a quirk, I get the whole thing, without any of the natural restrictions the original owner has. That means that a lot of the time I get a better quirk than the person I'm fighting has. But that also means that eventually you will be able to have this level of control, he said, sending a tendril of hair over to help her to her feet. She smiled lightly, as if considering something. You could be an incredible teacher, senpai. With that power, you could help hero students know exactly what to strive for, and help them to learn to use their quirk better than anyone else could. Monoma's eyes widened in shock. A teacher? Hamada's eyes were bright, and she held her hands in an excited, tight-fisted gesture that reminded him a bit of Tsunatori. Yeah, you could be such a great hero course teacher. Not only with your quirk, but you're so caring to students, and you're so steady and clever and leaderish. Monoma moved to object, but Kawasaki slapped a hand on his shoulder and grinned. Come on, mate, you got an entire class of first years to get changed, eat proper food, and sit down to watch a movie. Fucking A-level teacher material. He said in his Aussie drawl, and Monoma smiled lightly. He did do that, and they all listened and respected him. If he was a teacher, he could make sure his class got the attention they deserved. Maybe. But for now, hero training. So who's up next? This time Hamada herself raised a hand, magenta eyes glinting fiercely. She kind of looked like his sister, actually, with pinker eyes. Happy with that comparison, Monoma nodded and met her fierce grin with his signature cocky smirk, tucking his hands in his pockets as they stood opposite each other in the ring. Kawasaki called out for them to start in English, but neither of them moved. Monoma had guessed right from the beginning that Hamada would wait for him to attack and then take the force from his hits, so the best line of action was to be as gentle as possible. He sauntered forward, still slightly smiling with lazy, half-lidded eyes, and Hamada huffed and dropped her fighting stance. His smirk turned into a smile as she realized what he was doing, and the girl narrowed her eyes and charged forward at him. She was quick, but she still had to run across the entire field, and that gave Monoma plenty of time to prepare. He was tempted to use Hiroda's quirk to grab her with his hair, but they had agreed that he couldn't carry quirks into different matches. So when she began to swing her fist, he sidestepped just enough to dodge and bring his hand around to her back, taking her quirk and then pushing her off balance. He could have pinned her right then and there, but he was admittedly curious about the quirk. Her quirk felt weird in his head. He could suddenly feel the vibrations of the world around him and move them around. Experimentally, as he dodged, he took every little bit of force from their fight, from the breeze around them, from the other first years shifting as they watched, and bunched it together. He was getting tired from dodging Hamada, and had been hit by her solid fists and feet a few times, but was holding his own well enough, considering he was focused on the quirk. He heard the others whispering about what he could possibly be doing and grinned. When he had enough force to equate to one of Bakugo's medium explosions, he began to push back against Hamada, forcing her closer to the edge of the ring. He brought the bundle of force between them, and just as Hamada was about to try another hit, he released it. He aimed it mostly in her direction, but a fair bit of backlash still hit him and made him slide back across the ground. Hamada, however, flew backward and landed on the ground several meters outside of the ring. "Oh, Senpai, what was that?" Kawasaki said excitedly, running over to help up his friend who was just as shocked as he was. "Just another future feature of Hamada-kuen's quirk. I was taking the force from the wind, from her hits, from my dodges, and storing it all together until I had enough for a blast like that." Hamada was wide-eyed and looked down at her hands in shock. "I wasn't lying when I said it was a badass quirk, Hamada-kuen. You just need to keep practicing." She nodded fiercely. She did most things fiercely, and it was endearing to Minoma. As someone with a very solemn, orderly home life that was driven by expectations, it was nice to have these chaotic forces in his life. Like the annoying little siblings he never got to have, almost. "Okay. Isaac, you're up now." Minoma called him out, and the tall, horned boy stepped forward. Annoyingly, the kid towered literally 10 centimeters above Minoma, and that was before the added 20 centimeters of the large black horns sticking out from his sandy blonde hair. He oozed self-confidence in a way that almost made Minoma falter, until his suave mask split into a massive sheet-eating grin. "Oi, don't stress about being shorter than me, it's my genes, you know? Got these kick-ass horns too. People say I'm intimidating. The 15-year-old, he's seriously only 15? He's over 6 feet tall, shrugged and moved over to his side of the arena, one hand on the back of his head and the other in his pocket as he rubbed at his hair. There was blue electricity crackling between his horns now, and Hamada groaned. "Isaac, stop trying to intimidate our upperclassmen." She spoke in English and Minoma only just caught what she was saying, but Kawasaki just chuckled and shrugged again. "Alrighty, don't get your knickers in a knot." Hamada snickered, and Kawasaki grinned as he turned back to Minoma. He had no doubt that the electric blonde would fight like Kaminari, all out all at once, without much directional control. Boy, was he wrong. Turned out, he really got the wrong impression of the kid's quirk when he first saw it, because those horns were like lightning rods that stored his electricity, and worse, allowed him to control it much better than Kaminari's. "There's electricity inside my body, so I can't really do much with it," shtick. The second the fight started, declared this time by Doman, a stream of gleaming blue electricity connected the two horns, and Kawasaki reached up and put his hand it. There was a line of blue electricity spiraling around his arm now as he charged, and even as Minoma dodged the punch and let it scrape past him to pick up the quirk, the electricity bit at him and legitimately was strong enough to make him jump back. He felt the ache in his skull and the splitting in his skin, the energy in his body burning as a pair of horns emerged from his head. "So they are a vital part of the quirk, then. Interesting. Whoa, that was sick," Kawasaki breathed, the electricity in his body dying down momentarily. Minoma reached up to touch them, and a powerful shock made him jolt once again. "Yeah, it's bloody painful," Kawasaki joked, taking a deep breath as electricity sparked from the bottom of his horns and began to weave and thrive around his body. "It's about controlling your wattage and all," he supplied, the crackling electricity making the green in his hazel eyes glow threateningly. He tapped a foot lightly, and all the electricity shot out of the tips of his toes, running along the ground at an incredible speed and reaching Minoma before he could react. He heard yelping that no doubt came from the other first years that were hit by it, but Minoma was frozen momentarily in place. In the second that he wasn't moving, Kawasaki lurched forward and punched Minoma in the stomach. "Get it together, damn it. You have less experience and apparently not much knowledge of the quirk, so you need to find your advantage. Kawasaki tried to shoot more electricity at him, but this time, the quirk in the back of his mind murmured take and the electricity transferred into his own body painlessly, moving up and curling around his own horns. Whoa, I get to do that? Cool. Monoma grinned at the teen as they rushed back toward each other. At that point it was basically just hand-to-hand combat, and while Kawasaki definitely had a size and brute strength advantage from whatever sports he did, Monoma had better technique and skill. They fought for a bit, swinging electrically charged punches, Monoma absorbing the charge and Kawasaki getting hit by it, until the younger started to fatigue. Monoma began to land more punches and use more charge on each of those punches, forcing Kawasaki to skid backward with each hit until he was pushed out of the ring. The electricity disappeared from his horns and he stood to his full height again, shrugging. Well, I didn't think I would win. That was fun though. Monoma smiled at him. Yeah. It's just stamina for you. You have more practice with the quirk than I do. I don't even really understand how it works. I just picked up what I could from watching you and then waited until you were tired so I could push you out. I think I felt the ability in there to control the wattage of electricity you let out. Kawasaki nodded, and Monoma hummed. Which would mean that once you unlock, said with air quotes, the absorption ability, you'll have access to higher voltage shocks that you can't make with the electricity you generate. How does that work, by the way? Kawasaki grinned and reached up above his head, grabbing his horns with both hands in what was definitely a habit for him. Like he was steering himself, in a way. It's static electricity. When I move around and brush my limbs against each other or put my hands in my pockets, it builds a charge that is stored in these little fuckers. He knocked on one of his horns and his head tilted slightly at the hit. Then I can move it to the outside or to different parts of my body through touch, like when you can zap people after scuffing your socks on the carpet. Kinetic energy. Monoma couldn't relate to the socks on the carpet analogy, but the certainty in Kawasaki's eyes made him think that was definitely an Australian thing. Okay, Nakarani-kun, you're up. The girl shuffled into the ring, and Monoma felt the horns sink into his head as he deactivated the quirk. The girl sighed shakily where she stood, and then Kawasaki enthusiastically called the beginning of the match. The girl's expression completely suched as she charged forward, swinging a punch at him. As her fist got closer, he noticed 3 things about her fighting. 1, when she closed a fist, she didn't tuck her fingers all the way in. She only folded them to the second knuckle, leaving a sharper surface for her hits. 2, he could see the bones straining under her skin. Her elbows, her knuckles, her shoulders, he could see them drawing to sharp points that stretched the layer of flesh above them. And 3, this girl was smarter than he gave her credit for. Because as he dodged the punch again, he noticed too late that her elbow was slack, and when her fist missed his face, her elbow was jabbed out and hit him sharply in the shoulder. At least he had the quirk now. He felt his bones go slack and he sunk into the floor, Nakatani tripping slightly before Monoma grinned and popped back up to his full height. That's interesting, he said to her, then pushed his mind to harden as far as he could. He could feel the slight piercing pain around his joints, and when he looked, his bones were stabbing through his skin in jagged points. It wasn't just at his joints though, because more spikes were sticking out along the bone in his forearm, his shins, and from the gasp Nakatani let out and the pain on his head, he could tell that he had grown stark white horns too. Very interesting, he laughed, before swinging forward and punching Nakatani, the spikes in his fist making it extra brutal as she stepped back, winded. He took advantage of her breathlessness and picked her up, careful not to stab her with the small spikes on his fingers, and moved to throw her out of the ring when she went slack and slipped out of his arms. She couldn't dissolve fully like Monoma could, but she became very pliable and soft. She bounced back and swung another hit at him, but he dodged and dodged again, and dropped into a puddle to dodge an especially strong hit before popping back up and kicking her in the back. She whipped around and he shoved her back, the girl tripping, falling, and then softening so that she landed just short of the edge of the ring. God damn it. She tried to slide away, but he grabbed onto her shirt and flung her the rest of the way out of the ring, the girl's fluid form making a squelch noise as it thwacked against a tree. That was good, Nakarani-kun. Your quirk is powerful and you have good control over it. You just need experience. She returned to her regular bone self and nodded sheepishly, then Monoma turned back to the group. It's getting a little late, so I'll give you some normal training exercises that you can do and then walk you back to your dorm. Monoma didn't want to think about what he'd do after that. He couldn't go back to his dorm, he couldn't stay out there, he didn't have much of a choice. He could go to visit Hatsum, but she was supposed to sleep and Monoma being there would compel her to just talk about her babies all night. Not that she wouldn't do that anyway. He mulled over his options as he walked the 1A students back to their dorm, cleaned up all the food wrappers that their classmates had left behind, and then stepped out onto the pavement only to realize he didn't know where he was going. He supposed that checking in on Hatsum or some of his other support course friends wouldn't hurt, and it would buy him more time because their dorms were on the other end of their cluster of complexes. He began his leisurely walk across campus, as people had started calling it, hands in his pockets, bag on his shoulder, and way too many thoughts in his head. Oi, shitty hair. Bakuga's voice came from Shinsu's mouth, and Kaminari cackled. I'm Katsuki Bakugu and I'm a little beach, he said, and the monotonous way of speaking mixed with Bakuga's words made Kaminari laugh again. His face lit up, eyes wide and fists clenched excitably in front of him. Do you think we can prank the others with it? Shinso sighed and slid the voice modulator down off of his mouth, smiling lightly at the blonde. Please? Come on, Shinsu-kun, it'll be hilarious. Shinso rolled his eyes, but he began to pick up their stuff all the same. Okay, fine, he allowed, and Kaminari jumped to his feet. Yeah, that's the spirit. Kaminari ran past him, fist pumping the air and abseiling down off of the roof on Shinsu's capture weapon. Shinso dropped their stuff down to him and then slid down the capture weapon gracefully, unhooking it from whatever was holding it in place. Hey, what would happen if you put your own voice through it? When Shinso looked at him, slightly exasperated but completely amused, Kaminari continued. Like if you layered your own voice over your normal voice. Would it be Shinso squared? Shinso was silent for a second before his careful mask broke, and he snorted out a laugh. You're dumb, he said instead of replying, and Kaminari flushed as he followed Shinso back into the dorms. So, who are we gonna prank? He said excitedly, and Shinso raised an eyebrow. I thought you had an idea? Shinsu-kun, I need you to realize that I am not an ideas man. I suggest a topic and then everyone else does all the thinking, that's how it works. Shinso chuckled lightly and then leaned back. When he looked back at Kaminari, he noticed golden eyes tracing his neck and collarbones, and smirked to himself. He leaned forward, loose shirt hanging down and offering Kaminari a view all the way down his chest and stomach, something that the blonde fell for easily. What about Midoriya-kun? Can we mess with him a bit? Kaminari pouted. Everyone loved Midoriya and Shinso could tell that the blonde didn't want to upset their determined and powerful, yet so oblivious and sweet little classmate. Can we F with Igibro instead? He keeps distracting me in class and he won't get upset, Kaminari suggested, and Shinso sighed. Plus Midoriya-kun is crazy strong, and I don't want to get yelled out of a 5th-floor windowed if we scare him. Shinso narrowed his eyes. Did you just dash? Yes, I did, moving on. I want to do something to get Igibro to jump out the window. He said that he'd do it if there was danger, like use his quirk to land on the ground unscathed, so like I want to scare him and make him dash. Please, don't finish that sentence. Kaminari grinned and mimed zipping his mouth shut. But yes, we can do something to make Kirishima-kun jump out of his window. Where's his dorm? 3rd floor, 2nd room. Next to Bakugu-kun. Shinso hummed. So what would make him scared enough to jump out of his window? I dunno, he's pretty scared of the villains obviously, but maybe like, Mina telling him to jump might work too if you can make her sound worried enough. Or Aizawa-sensei. Shinso grinned at the last one, already turning the dials on his mask to his Aizawa setting. Okay, let's go. They snuck out of the room and up to the 3rd floor, acting much more suspicious than they needed to until they reached his room. Shinso nodded to Kaminari, stood outside his door, and raised his voice modulator over his face. He slammed his hand onto the door loudly. Kirishima-kun, get out. Out the window, go. He shouted, and they heard a yell of, a yes, sensei. followed by the sound of the window sliding open and a couple seconds later, the thud of Kirishima hitting the ground. Kaminari jiggled the lock open and they both looked out the window to see Kirishima sitting in a sizable dent in the pavement. "I'm okay," he shouted up to them, and Kaminari burst out laughing. Shinso pulled down his voice modulator and waved slightly, and they saw Kirishima huff. "That's totally not manly, dude." Kaminari just pouted and leaned further out of the window. Shinso had half a mind to grab onto his shirt to make sure he didn't fall out like an idiot. "Come on, bro. I just wanted to see if you'd actually do it. It was funny, come on bro." Kirishima's slightly breathless laugh echoed up from the ground. "I was super scared, bro." "I know, bro." Shinso rolled his eyes. "Did they really talk like that? Really? I really messed up the sidewalk." Kaminari cackled again, and then with his biggest sheet-eating grin he waved, shut the window, and dragged Shinso out of the room. "That was great," he exclaimed, and the two of them went back to Kaminari's room, leaving Kirishima sitting out at the front of their dorm building in mildly stunned silence. Minoma had been wandering around school grounds aimlessly when he came across Kirishima, sitting slightly dazed in a hole in the ground. The redhead looked up at him and smiled. "Hey Minoma, are you looking for Shinso?" Minoma moved closer and helped the other teen to stand. "Shinso is in there? I'll just go then." Minoma turned to leave, but Kirishima grabbed onto his wrist and pulled him back. I know it's totally unmanly to pry, but did something happen with you too? You seemed like you were friends earlier today." Minoma looked at the boy thoughtfully. His hair wasn't up in its usual insane spikes, lying flat down and framing his face in thick locks of red hair. He had a genuine look in his eyes, and a small, softly reassuring smile that made Minoma feel like he could trust the guy. "Fine, he'll bite." "Yeah, that was before he outed me to my entire class." Kirishima's eyes widened and he looked physically shaken. "Seriously? Did he do it on purpose?" Minoma was a little taken aback by the fact that that was the weird part of the sentence to Kirishima, but he welcomed the change. "I mean, I don't really know. All I know is that I told him, he told someone, that person told someone, and then those people told everyone." Kirishima huffed and looked down, before meeting Minoma's eyes fiercely. Minoma was taller than the redhead, he realized in a moment of amusement. Only by an inch or so, but it was an inch that he'd hold on to with every fiber of his being. "That's super unmanly. Do you know how everyone's taking it?" Minoma sighed and rubbed his face. He shivered slightly. He had come out here in clothing that was fit for training, not for standing around in the cold any longer than he had to. Kirishima must have noticed, because he took Minoma's hand and led him inside. They snuck past the group sitting out on the couches, past everyone else in the dorms, and shut them in his room. "Why were you outside anyway?" Minoma asked casually, looking around the room. "I jumped out the window." "Unimportant." "So anyway, Kirishima tried to get back on topic, but was interrupted when Minoma let out a laugh. A genuine laugh, one that Kirishima had never actually heard before, and he thought that it was kind of pretty. He much preferred it to Minoma's usual insane cackling or cocky chuckle, anyway. Honestly, he kind of wanted to hear it again. Sorry, why did you jump out of the window?" He managed to get out amidst his laughter, and Kirishima found himself laughing along. Shinso and Kaminari used his voice thing to trick me into thinking that Aizawa told me to because there was something going on. It was kind of terrifying, actually." Minoma immediately stopped laughing, and his eyebrows knitted together, accompanied by a slight pout. Why was Minoma of all people suddenly adorable? He must have gotten a concussion when he landed on the concrete. That's not very heroic. Or manly. Minoma grinned the last part, and Kirishima pushed him playfully. "Seriously. Someone needs to put the two of them in check," Minoma said, and his eyes lit up like Kirishima had seen them do in joint training, just before he out-strategized his opponent and won the exercise. Kirishima had seen it directed at himself more times than he was proud of. But Minoma's eyes were gleaming as he stepped slightly closer to Kirishima so that he could speak in a hushed tone. "Where's Kaminari's dorm, if you don't mind me asking?" He spoke lowly, and Kirishima frowned a bit. "It's directly below mine, actually." Minoma's eyes fell into that cocky, half-lidded gaze, and he brought a hand up to gesture vaguely. So do you think they might have seen us talking earlier? Kirishima thought for a second. It was only on the second floor, they might have heard them talking, and Kaminari probably would have checked on him just in case. Yeah, they probably know we're here now. Minoma sat down on Kirishima's bed and looked him in the eye. And do you think I might be able to get my hands on Shirokuin's quirk? Kirishima's eyes widened as he finally caught the gist of what Minoma was implying, and then he smiled. Yeah, I think I could arrange that. The first step of the plan was simple: get them to open a window. It had a simple solution too: just make the room warmer. So Minoma came across Hagakure, took her quirk, turned himself invisible, snuck downstairs, cranked the heat back up, and then came back and put his clothes back on. Kirishima didn't think about the fact that Minoma had gotten completely undressed and redressed right next to him, nor did he think about how he hadn't been wearing any kind of underwear underneath his sweatpants. Minoma seemed like exactly the type of person to go commando out of sheer self-confidence, and Kirishima's thoughts almost drifted to wondering what exactly Minoma had to be so confident about before he firmly walled off that part of his mind. Nope, absolutely not going there. While he was invisible, he had gone and gotten Shiro's quirk too, and now stood there with his characteristic large, round elbows. He was bleeding out of the slit in his elbow that the tape would come from, and Kirishima almost asked about it before he saw Minoma's wince of pain and decided that the blonde didn't want to acknowledge it. He shot some tape at the windowsill and lowered himself down, and then they waited. About a minute later, the window began to slide open, and they struck. Minoma flipped upside down like Spider-Man and hung down directly into Kaminari's face. Hi. He smiled, then reached forward, grabbed Kaminari by the shirt, and pulled him out of the window. He wrapped the blonde in a tape cocoon and hung him just above the windowsill, then Kirishima pulled him back up through his own window. The two teens looked out the window and laughed as Kaminari wiggled and Shinso tried to reach up to grab him, eventually disappearing and coming back with his capture weapon. Kaminari had started laughing too as Shinso repeatedly tried and failed to grab him with his torn capture weapon, eventually grabbing the golden blonde and his tape cocoon and pulling him inside. By that point Kirishima and Minoma were basically collapsed against walls and on the floor, laughing their heads off until Shinsu's voice told them to shut up, only succeeding in making them laugh harder. After a minute, they calmed down, settling into a silence that was teetering on the line between comfortable and uncomfortable. Kirishima grit his pointed teeth slightly and looked at Minoma. Do you know how they're all taking it? You being. Actually, you didn't even tell me what Shinsukuin outed you as, Kirishima realized, and Minoma chuckled. I'm gay. And judging by the fact that none of my friends have told me that it's okay to go back yet, I'd say at least a quarter of the class hasn't taken it well, Minoma sighed, and Kirishima huffed. That Esikas, bro, super unmanly to judge someone for who they like. Minoma scoffed when Kirishima spoke, and looked up with one eyebrow raised. At Kirishima's confused expression, he breathed a laugh. Sorry, you really are a carbon copy of Tetsukun, huh? Kirishima rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly, and he was almost embarrassed enough to miss it when Minoma spoke again. You're definitely cuter though. When Minoma looked back at the other teen, his face was as red as his hair, and the blonde laughed. Yup, adorable. He slapped Kirishima on the shoulder and looked like he was about to leave. Wait, Minoma-kun. If you're worried about going back, you can stay here. Minoma raised an eyebrow and looked down at Kirishima, who was still sitting on the floor. It's 10 o'clock though, curfew is in 30 minutes and I haven't eaten or anything. I'm sure Kendo-san would cover for you? Kirishima was a bit ashamed of how hopeful he sounded, but he really wanted to keep talking to Minoma. It wasn't like he was ever going to get the chance to see him acting like a decent person around him again. Minoma smirked and sat down on Kirishima's bed, and the redhead tentatively sat next to him. They were quiet for a moment, until Kirishima mentally slapped himself in the face and forced his question out of his mouth. Hey Minoma-kun? Minoma hummed in response, shifting on the bed so that he was now leaning against the headboard and looking at Kirishima. His contradictory eyes, the chalky, dusky baby blue color and the natural lazy half-liddedness were so soft and gentle, but he could probably cut someone with his glare or that disgusted, immensely hurtful once-over he could give. Kirishima was a little bit in awe of those eyes that were fixed directly on Kirishima's own made the question that much harder to ask. How did you know that you liked guys? Monoma sighed, but he didn't ridicule Kirishima, something that legitimately threw him off guard for a moment. Whenever Monoma came up in conversation with Tetsu, his friend always insisted that the blonde had a compassionate, dedicated, selfless side. Tetsu had even gone as far as to say he was probably the manliest boy in Class 1B, second only to Kendo, but Kirishima had never believed it until now. I don't know if it's something you have to figure out. Just one day you like a boy in the same way someone else might like a girl, and that's that. It's a person's choice, or the choice of the people around them, I guess, whether they recognize and accept it how it is or make it weird and turn it into something that needs to be discovered, Monoma replied thoughtfully, and Kirishima nodded. Has he liked a guy before? Kirishima couldn't really tell. He hadn't liked a girl before either, he didn't think. And how do I know if I like a boy? I don't really know what to compare it to. Kirishima replied sheepishly, and Monoma knitted his eyebrows together and hummed to himself. Kirishima was immensely grateful that Monoma was taking his questions seriously. He had honestly expected to be scoffed at and left alone in his room, like Bakugo had done whenever Kirishima tried to bring up the topic. How do you know? I guess. He paused and looked Kirishima over, but it wasn't a gesture made to destroy self-esteem, it was genuine curiosity. If I had to guess for you? Being near them makes you happy, you want to help them when they're upset and you think they're amazing. Manly, whatever. You like to talk to them and look at them, and you especially like to touch them, because you definitely seem like a physically affectionate person. Kirishima didn't exactly know what that meant, but he blushed a bit anyway. How do I know if I like someone if I have to touch them? First, that's what you do after you know you like someone. Not necessarily, Monoma said, but didn't elaborate. Kirishima definitely wanted him to elaborate. What do you mean not necessarily? Monoma looked over to him, and while this glance was definitely more dismissive, it still wasn't hurtful. Just a sign that Monoma wasn't exactly into this topic of conversation. You can touch someone without liking them that way. You know, if you think they're hot and they think you're hot and all. Monoma grinned at him and his no doubt embarrassed face. You get what I mean now? You're so innocent, Kirishima-kun. Kirishima frowned and thought back over their conversation. Definitely cuter though. Did that mean the same thing? Kirishima decided that they were past the point of regular decency and blurted out his next question. You said I was cute earlier. Okay, maybe that was more of a statement. Monoma raised an eyebrow and looked him over once again. That was definitely a more objective look than before. Yeah, I did. You are cute, he said matter-of-factly, oozing confidence as he looked straight into Kirishima's eyes. Do you think I'm? Do I think you're hot? Monoma supplied, and Kirishima nodded and braced himself for a harsh and resounding no, but it never came. He opened his eyes and immediately met Monoma's gaze again, and the blonde was smiling softly. You're so flustered, I never would have expected that from someone whose hero costume is completely missing a shirt. Kirishima went to speak, but Monoma got to the slight gap in their conversation first. Yeah, you're pretty attractive, I think most people agree on that. You don't leave much of your upper half to the imagination. Kirishima subconsciously grabbed the hem of his shirt and Monoma chuckled. Why, do you think I'm hot? The blonde didn't look like he expected an answer, but too bad, he was getting one. Yeah, I do. But you wear a lot of clothes, which just proves you're better looking than I am, because everyone thinks you're attractive without you showing off your entire upper body to everyone, Kirishima rambled, and Monoma looked genuinely thrown off guard. Huh, he said simply and shrugged, getting off of the bed. Oh, I'm sorry if all my questions made you uncomfortable. I get that it's probably not what you want to talk about right now. Monoma turned back and shook his head. Relax, Kirishi. You can call me Aijiro. I've probably had more of a real conversation with you than with a lot of my friends, so. Kirishima trailed off, and Monoma shrugged. Well, relax, Aijiro-kun. I was just gonna change into a better shirt to sleep in. Kirishima just nodded and leaned back on his bed. He turned to his bedside table to pick up his phone, and when he turned back it took him a second to realize that Monoma hadn't left the room. He just took his shirt off. Right in front of Kirishima. Not that he hadn't done the exact same thing about 10 minutes ago, but he had been invisible then, and this time, Kirishima could see him. He wasn't skinny or bulky, he was lean, smooth muscle packed tightly onto his body, and Kirishima could tell he actively used every single one of them. He had that line down the middle of his back where his spine was, and his shoulders were broader than Kirishima remembered them, muscle obvious and literally rippling as he moved his arms to maneuver his shirt. Kirishima almost wished that the guy would turn around so that he could see. Wait, no. Stop, Kirishima, you thirsty beach. What had gotten into him lately? Kirishima, realizing how weird it was that he was staring, freaked out slightly, and his phone flung from his grip and landed with a hard thud on the ground halfway across the room. Monoma looked over his shoulder at the noise, glancing at Kirishima with a single raised eyebrow before he smirked and fully turned around to face him. Monoma was definitely built, that was all Kirishima would say. Defined stomach, chest and arms made even more obvious by the fact that he had said arms folded in front of him through the sleeves of his shirt. Monoma caught his eye and smirked, lifting the shirt and by extension, his arms up and really just selling the view for Kirishima before sliding the thin fabric down over his upper body, cloaking his appealing self in baggy clothing once again. What? Did you enjoy the view, Ijiro? Why did you do that there? What? It's not like I can leave this room. And you could have just looked away, you know. Monoma grinned, an actual sheet-eating grin that looked like it should have come straight from Siro or Kaminari, and Kirishima shivered. He'd literally changed in a room full of other guys before, why was it making him freak out this time? Since you're an open book and I can tell exactly what you're thinking right now, it's about context. In a change room you aren't freaking out over all the jacked shirtless guys everywhere because you're focused on hero training and because it's normal to see that in there. None of them are doing it for any kind of XPLCT reason. But having a guy you think is hot changing in your bedroom is a whole different scenario. He was speaking so casually, as if it was a normal, regular thing for Kirishima's heart to be pounding so fast. The only interactions he'd had with Monoma before today were when the blonde was actively trying, often successfully, in the case of hero training, to humiliate him. Kirishima didn't really know how to respond, and Monoma rolled his eyes and jumped onto his bed, landing flat on his back with his lower leg hanging off of the side. Oh shush. You've got your answers now, right? Yeah, he did. In a weird way, Monoma had been super helpful. Could you maybe do a snack run or something? I'm starving. Shinso and Kaminari had stopped pranking people after Monoma and Kirishima has beat them at their own game and absolutely destroyed Shinso's self-confidence as they did it. Kaminari was still giggling when he looked over at Shinso and saw that he looked upset. Ah, come on dude, it was just payback for what we did to IG bro, no harm done. Shinso waved him off. No, it's not that, just, it was Monoma-kun. Yeah, that was weird. I didn't know that Monoma-kun even tolerated any of us, much less hung out in IG bro's room. Shinso huffed and lay back on the floor. When he opened his eyes, Kaminari was in his line of vision staring straight up at the roof, smiling gently. Did something happen? Is that why you don't want to go back to your dorm? Shinso opened his mouth, then snapped it shut. I can't tell you, telling people things is exactly what I did wrong the first time. What? Did you blab one of his secrets or something? I didn't realize you were on secret-sharing basis with Monoma-kun, Kaminari joked, but Shinso just looked past Kaminari at the roof and sighed. Neither did I. A moment later he looked back down and noticed that Kaminari was literally planking over him, and he slid out from underneath the blonde amusedly. Did you just do a core workout so that you could show up in my line of sight at a dumb angle? Shinso accused as Kaminari slid his legs in underneath him and relaxed onto his knees. Yep, and I have no regrets. They heard the laughter die down in the room above, and Kaminari rolled his eyes. Oh, IG bro is totally into him. He doesn't freak out like that unless he thinks the person he's with is manly. Shinso felt a confusing tug in his chest. Not a lot. Just the tiniest nudge that made him the tiniest bit uncomfortable with what Kaminari had said. He felt a frown tug at his lips slightly, and Kaminari's smile completely fell from his face. You like Monoma-kun? Shinso looked at Kaminari like he had just been caught robbing a bank, wide-eyed and frozen in place. No, he didn't. He didn't, that was not it. Kaminari was insane. No, that's not it. I barely know Monoma-kun, I just feel bad about what happened. Yeah, that's all it was. Oh yeah, and that's why you looked like you wanted to bite Ijibro's head off when I mentioned that he was probably a little into Monoma-kun. Shinso rolled his eyes and looked at Kaminari like he was absolutely done with the topic, which he definitely was. I frowned slightly. Kaminari laughed and scooted forward. Yes, you did, after you went through all 5 stages of grief first. Kaminari tapped him on the nose and Shinso scowled and scooted back across the floor. How did you get out of that tape so quickly anyway? Kaminari shrugged and gestured vaguely to the pile of white scraps on the floor, and that was the end of the topic apparently. They sat in silence, Kaminari for once not having anything to say, when a loud thud from the room above startled them. What was that? Shinso asked after pausing and listening for more noises first. Ijibro probably just knocked something over or dropped something again. The blonde dismissed it, but Shinso had a feeling that there was something else. Does he do that a lot? He questioned, and Kaminari grinned. Yeah, it's pretty funny. He falls over a lot too. There are a bunch of holes in the floor that we've covered with rugs because whenever he trips he just hardens himself and then smacks head first into the ground and leaves a huge dent in it. Shinso laughed at that, and they fell silent again, before Kaminari whipped his head around. We should maybe not sit on the floor, he suggested, and Shinso shrugged and stood up. They looked around for a seat for a few seconds, before they made eye contact, shrugged, and sat on the bed. The resulting creak was almost loud enough to drown out the one from the bed above them. Almost. Was that? Kaminari muttered, and the two of them made eye contact. One of them probably just sat down really hard. Monoma is definitely dramatic enough to throw himself onto a bed, Shinso said, and they both nodded, falling silent again. When there was no noise from the room above, Shinso almost believed his explanation. What's the time? Shinso asked, looking around Kaminari's room for a clock or something. It's like 10 past. You want to go downstairs and hang out with the others until curfew? Shinso nodded and they ventured down the stairs, Ashido, Shiro, Midoriya, Yurika, Ida and Azui greeting them enthusiastically. Hey guys! Do you know where Kiri is? Shinso and Kaminari exchanged a look, and then Kaminari shrugged and leaned down over the back of the couch. I think I heard him in his room. The others just nodded, and then Midoriya and Ashido beckoned them down to watch whatever action movie they weren't really paying attention to. For 15 minutes Shinso sat and watched the remaining Baku squad start dumb conversations and make dumb choices, Midoriya, Azui and Yurika talking and occasionally joining in, while Ida tried to keep them all under control. It's almost curfew, we should be taking this time to wind down before Aizawa-sensei gets here. Sleep is for the weak, my dude. Shiro replied, sitting lying upside down on the couch with his legs hanging forward over him. Shinso snorted a laugh, and Shiro grinned while Ashido, Yurika and Kaminari groaned and forked over 1,000 yen bills from their pockets. Read 'em and weep, boys, I'm a pro at this. Shiro pulled sunglasses from somewhere and slipped them onto his face, that was reddening slightly from lying upside down for so long. Why did you have to laugh at that, Shinso-kun? I thought you were better than this. Yurika whined while Shiro pretended to make it rain pathetically with his 3 bills. Still upside down, of course. Just as Shinso was about to leave for his dorm, Kirishima emerged from the elevator, restlessly wringing his hands. The redhead greeted his friends, had a quick conversation, and immediately raided the kitchen. He made tea, a lot of it, and grabbed whatever snack he could find before heading up to his room. A few of his classmates teased him for being a reclusive glutton, but Shinso knew that wasn't the case. He knew that Monoma was hiding out in Kirishima's room specifically because Shinso was around. Maybe if Shinso hadn't been an idiot, Monoma wouldn't be here suddenly becoming best friends with Kirishima. Instead of with me, his brain supplied the end of that sentence, and Shinso pushed it down. He was not jealous of the class or red sweetheart. His personality is just the middle ground between Kaminari and Midoriya. There was literally nothing for Shinso to be jealous of. Except for the fact that Monoma is sitting in his bedroom. I better get going, there's like 5 minutes to curfew. The others said their reluctant goodbyes and Shinso left the building, arriving at his dorms just in time to be ushered into his room by Vlad King. Just as he was closing his door, he heard Kendo speak. He's already in his room, Vlad-sensei. He felt unwell and went to sleep about an hour ago. Shinso knew for a fact that was a lie. Monoma was sitting in Kirishima's room eating all of Class A's snacks, but he didn't speak up. Instead, he just shut his door and collapsed tiredly onto his bed, his hair falling down into his eyes. He didn't sleep very often and he sure as hell knew he wouldn't sleep tonight, so he waited for the dorm to fall silent, scrolling through Reddit on his phone, and then snuck downstairs at about 2 a.m. to get something to eat. He made tea when he couldn't find anything quiet to eat and fell asleep on the couch about half an hour later. At 6 a.m., when the smallest rays of sunshine were creeping over the tops of buildings, Shinso was awoken by the harsh creak of the floorboards and a hushed curse. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and then opened them to lock gazes with Monoma, who looked like a deer in headlights, 1 foot raised off of the ground as he had no doubt been trying to sneak up to his room. Monoma-kun. Monoma put his foot down on the ground and spun around, moving to walk straight back out the door. Before he even knew what was happening, Shinso had chased after him and stopped him just inside of the dorm, one hand gripping tightly onto the blonde's wrist. Monoma-kun, wait, I'm so sorry. Just give me a chance to explain what happened. Monoma ripped his wrist out of Shinso's grip, but turned around to look at him expectantly. His eyes were narrowed, his eyebrows were knitted together, and his mouth was drawn into a thin line as he crossed his arms and tapped his foot on the welcome mat. Everything about his expression and body language was the pinnacle of distrust and annoyance, and Shinso just blinked, still not fully awake. Well? Shinso blinked and looked Monoma directly in the eye. He took a shaky breath, God, he hated not being in control of a conversation, and opened his mouth to speak, when, of course, unbelievable. Monoma turned around and started to slip back into his shoes, and Shinso, in a last-ditch attempt to stop him, grabbed his head and turned him around to face him, cupping his face and tilting it up to look at him. I'm so sorry, Monoma-kun. I fed up, I know that, you shouldn't have had to deal with any of this. I thought everyone knew already. It was stupid, I should have figured out that Aways didn't know the second he was jealous over you and Tokage, but I didn't pick up on it and I told him and I'm so sorry. I'm an idiot. Monoma's eyes were wide and his mouth was slightly open in shock, the blonde bringing a hand up to touch the one that was holding his face. Shinso flushed, Monoma gaped for a moment, and then pulled back out of his grip. Yeah, you did F up. Everything is going to be so awful now. They're probably going to kick me out of the bathroom or the change room and make me go somewhere else, and none of them will talk to me, the teachers probably won't like me, not that they really did anyway, and dash. Not true. Once again, Shinso spoke before he thought, and Monoma stopped ranting to look up at him curiously. Oh yeah? How do you know? What was it with Monoma and making him blurt out everything he was thinking? He could hardly say that he knew Aizawa and Present Mike were married, that was private and they keep it from the students for a reason. If he hadn't walked in on them making out in Aizawa's office a traumatizing experience, then he wouldn't know either. Nothing. I can't say, you're probably right, I have no reason to think that they wouldn't hate you, Shinso rambled, and Monoma raised an eyebrow. Did you just almost out a teacher to me? God, you really are terrible at secrets. Monoma stopped talking and rocked on his heels, and Shinso could see he was dying to ask which teacher it was. But he didn't. Instead he pushed past Shinso and went into the kitchen. Are you not going to ask who it is? Shinso said, and Monoma scoffed. No. I know how it feels now, I'm never going to try and push the topic of someone's sexuality ever again, he replied as he turned on the kettle, the nasally sound of it heating up breaking their silence. They really needed a new kettle. I really am sorry, Monoma-kun. I never wanted this to happen. Monoma sighed and put his face in his hands, leaning on the counter for a moment. I don't care, Shinso-kun. You weren't really the one that started it, anyway. You accidentally said something. It was a Waze-kun that deliberately told Tsunatori-san to try and start a rumor. You didn't mean to, so it's whatever. Clearly it wasn't whatever, but Shinso didn't know how to continue the conversation. He moved to the kitchen and sat down on a stool next to the island, drumming his fingers lightly on the smooth marble countertop. Are you gonna just hang around here? Monoma asked over his shoulder as he picked up the kettle, swinging it dangerously close to Shinso as he poured boiling water into a cup. Well, it takes me like 3 hours to get to sleep, and I'll start getting ready for school soon anyway. Monoma looked him over, and then shrugged. Your hair is flat, he said plainly, and Shinso smiled and pushed the wavy strands back off of his face. They fell back down anyway. What, did you think it just stuck up like that naturally? Monoma just shrugged and leant on the island. He looked like he really wanted to reach over and mess with his hair, and Shinso sighed. You know you can touch it if you want. It's not like I could stop you anyway, he drawled tiredly, and Monoma pulled back. Do you want me to make you some? He changed the subject, and Shinso muttered a yes, please, before running his hand through his hair again. Did Monoma think it looked weird down? Suddenly self-conscious, Shinso pulled up the hood on the jumper he was wearing to cover his hair. When Monoma turned around, his expression was immediately soft as he took in the sight in front of him. You are actually adorable, you know that, right? The blonde said nonchalantly, and Shinso grit his teeth because he knew that if he opened his mouth he would say something dumb. You look so soft right now, honestly. Monoma was no longer brandishing the kettle, instead setting his elbow on the counter and resting his chin on his hand, smiling gently at Shinso. Shinso just tugged his hood down harder, and Monoma made a sound that could only be called a giggle. He pushed a cup of tea across the counter with 2 fingers, picking up his own in 2 hands and taking a sip. Monoma shivered slightly, and it was then that Shinso realized he was only in a t-shirt and it was around 15 degrees outside. Hey, are you cold? Here, you can take my hoodie if you want. Shinso flipped down his hood and started to unzip his hoodie. Monoma just sighed. Nah, I'm fine. I feel pretty warm, actually. They stayed silent after that, Monoma leaning on the counter as Shinso stayed seated in a stool. When they finished their tea, Monoma took the cups and washed them out in the sink, drying them and putting them in the cupboard. Does that count as clean? It was just tea. We don't need to waste dishwasher space that will definitely be needed for when Tsuburaba and Setsuna try to make mug cake again. He laughed quietly, and then sighed. Although, I guess it'll be a while before they do anything together again. Shinso slid off of his seat and went over to stand next to Monoma, putting a hand on his shoulder. It'll be okay, Monoma. Tokage said that they all really appreciate you, don't they? They will get over it soon. They were probably just shocked is all. I hope so. Monoma closed the cupboard and turned to face Shinso, looking him in the eye like he was conflicted on what to do. After his moment of deliberation, Monoma just gave him a wonky smile that didn't reach his eyes, and walked away. He slung his bag over his shoulder and crept up the stairs to his bedroom, silent as a mouse and leaving Shinso standing in the kitchen with an itch on his head that couldn't be reached by his own hand. He recalled the last time he had talked to Monoma alone. The blonde had come to ask him to eat breakfast with his friends and touched his hair, and then Shinso had slammed the door in his face. And then Monoma brought him toast anyway. Really, too good of a person for Shinso to be friends with. After a minute of standing alone in the kitchen, Shinso picked up his phone that only had 4% battery left and retreated to his own room, plugging it in, flopping onto his bed, and then deciding to go look in the mirror. He opened the bathroom door and looked in the mirror. Horrible, dark, unsightly eye bags, flat, greasy hair that's waving slightly and hanging down over his face. Hoodie half unzipped, eyes half closed, he looked like a homeless person. You're adorable, you know that, right? Shinso had no idea how Monoma came to that conclusion. Just as he turned to leave the room again, the door swung open, and Monoma walked in. A towel slung over his shoulder, head down as he looked at his phone, wearing only his boxers. What was with this guy? Shinso yelped and Monoma's eyes snapped up to meet his, face rapidly reddening before he slid his towel off of his shoulder and unraveled it like a curtain between them. What are you doing in here? I thought you were downstairs. He exclaimed, dropping the towel slightly to look over it. His fingertips were white from how hard he was gripping the towel. I was getting ready. A lie, why aren't you wearing clothes? Shinso yelled back, and Monoma scoffed. I am wearing clothes. I just have the rest of them in my hand because I'd rather spend as little time stripping in the bathroom as possible. Why would you be stripping? Shinsu's head was swimming from embarrassment, and Monoma scoffed again. I'm having a shower, dickweed. Shinsu's eyes widened and he stifled a laugh. Did he just use an English insult? More than that, an English curse word? What? Nothing. Just, dickweed? I always thought you were more eloquent than that. Monoma huffed. I've been spending too much time around those 2 first years. The Australian one has a very colorful vocabulary. Shinso laughed again, and Monoma brought the towel closer and hugged it under his chin. Shinso almost viscerally groaned at how adorable it was. The blonde looked him up and down, shrugged, and flung the towel back over his shoulder, walking across the room and hanging it on the rack. His boxers were a pastel pink, which Shinso noticed even though he totally wasn't looking at Monoma's butt, and he found it hilarious and also endearing. Okay, I'm gonna go so you can shower and whatever. Nah, it's fine. You were getting ready, right? Just ignore me. Wow, way to back me into a corner, Monoma. If he stays, he'll be in a room fully naked with Monoma. Obviously, it's a normal thing usually. Showering or bathing in the same room as other people is something that happens regularly in the dorms, but it's never been Monoma. Monoma, who was currently sliding his fingers under the waistband of his boxers, and Shinso turned away, but there was a mirror there, so he just slammed himself into a bathroom stall. You doing okay, Shinsu-kun? He heard the sound of water running and leant back against the wall. Yeah, I'm fine. You know, some of the guys in our class are pretty crazy XHBTNSTS in the bathrooms. You might want to learn how to function normally around mostly and fully naked people. Shinso could hear the teasing lilt in his voice, and he huffed. I'm usually fine, it's just Dash. What, do you just not want to see me naked? No. I'm sure you've got, that's not it, I'm just Dash, Monoma laughed, and Shinso was sure that if they were talking face to face the blonde would have waved him off. It's fine, you're just awkward, I can tell. Yeah, Shinso was just an awkward person, that was it. Plus I'm gay, so I imagine most people are going to start acting like that around me. At least it will make Tsuburaba-kun actually put clothes on for once in his life, Monoma added, and Shinsu's eyes flew wide as he stood up and faced the wall that he thought Monoma was behind. Hey, no, that's not it at all. And that shouldn't be the reason that people start having some decency. I don't think it's indecent to be comfortable in your skin. Especially not in the bathroom, that's kind of the point of it being a different room. They were quiet for a second, and then the water turned off and Shinso heard Monoma shuffle across the floor. Either way, I'm not naked anymore, so you're welcome to stop hiding in a toilet stall. Are you just mostly naked now? Shinso teased, moving to unlock the door. Yeah. Shinso faltered for a second, and then pushed the door open, greeted with the sight of Monoma with a towel around his waist. Leaning over to get closer to the mirror as he moved his hair around to try and neaten it from the dripping mess of blonde points that it was at the moment. There were droplets of water sliding slowly down his upper body, and he had his bottom lip between his teeth in a pout of concentration. Do you need to shower, Shinsu-kun? If what Ijiro-kun said yesterday was true, you probably didn't have one last night. That was true, Shinso probably should have a shower now, but he didn't want to do it with Monoma in the room. He caught sight of Monoma's smirk for just a second in the mirror, and he had an idea. He could be embarrassed, or he could get revenge for what was clearly a deliberate attempt to make him nervous. Yeah, I probably should. Shinso unzipped his hoodie and threw it, the plush fabric hitting the mirror and sliding down to rest on the counter. He did the same with his shirt, his breathes, and caught Monoma watching him through the mirror as he slipped his boxers down and flicked them up into his hand with his foot. He flung them back to where the rest of his clothing was piled, and felt Monoma's gaze leave him. He kept his back turned the entire time he showered, sitting down and feeling the water run over his body only slightly more often than he felt Monoma's eyes drifting over him. He continued to face away, going and grabbing a towel from the back of the room specifically so that he didn't face toward Monoma. He hung it dangerously low on his hips, and when he turned around Monoma was dressed. Mostly dressed. In a different pair of boxers, light blue this time, and was that Shinsu's hoodie? Monoma was leaning back on the counter, hoodie unzipped just enough to reveal a bit of collarbone and make it clear that he didn't have a shirt on underneath it. Casual looking, yet so very deliberate. He turned back to the mirror and continued to sort his hair, revealing the large purple cartoon Y cat on the back of the black hoodie. It used to have F off written on it, but it had partly faded away and now just said F dashed. Aizawa had gotten it for him on his last day of first year as a dumb joke, but Shinso wore it everywhere now. What? It was a comfortable hoodie. And it looked really good on Monoma. Is that my hoodie? Yeah. Well, you offered before, so I figured dash. Yeah. Yeah, it looks good on you, Shinso said, and Monoma smiled. Thank you, kind sir. He fluffed with his hair one more time, and then scooped up his pink boxers and left the room. Shinso stayed for a second, wondering how he lost again, wondering when it became a competition, and then going back to his room. His phone had 52%, it was 6:45 a.m., and Shinso was pretty ahead of schedule, so he dried his hair aggressively with his towel and then fell face-first onto his bed. After a minute he decided that he should probably put clothes on, and settled for his second favorite hoodie and a pair of gray sweatpants, deciding to take the opportunity to get breakfast before anyone else was down there. The early risers were definitely awake by now, but they were probably getting dressed and going to the bathroom before they would give to get food. Monoma, still avoiding everyone, had apparently had the same idea, because he was already eating a roll of something when Shinso showed up. The blonde was mostly his uniform now, but he still had Shinsu's hoodie on instead of the UA blazer. I like you in my clothes, Shinso blurted suddenly, and he was so very thankful that nobody else was downstairs. Monoma looked at him like he had grown a second head, but only for a second before his face fell into a lax smirk. Really? Maybe if you got me naked more often I'd have an excuse to take more of your clothes. He shrugged one shoulder out of the loose hoodie and smiled provocatively. Shinso couldn't believe he just said that. How does someone say things like that with no filter? Shinso was supposed to be the one who says things just to get a reaction, that was his whole thing, yet Monoma seemed to have him beat in every possible way. Okay, was all he could manage to choke out, and Monoma laughed again before tugging the hoodie tighter around him and waltzing out of the kitchen. This time when he stepped onto the carpet, he stopped in front of Shinso, chewing the last bite of whatever he had been eating. You know, I like your hair like this, Monoma muttered, swallowing his breakfast and looking up at Shinso. Shinso had a few inches on the blonde, but Monoma's presence usually more than made up for his stature, though right then they were just two people. Two people that were 3 inches apart in height and 10 inches apart in distance. Monoma's nimble hands slid up into his hair, pushing it back off of his face and tugging on it ever so slightly. Shinso felt completely in over his head. He had no control and he wasn't sure if he liked it or not, but at that moment he desperately wanted to change it. As Monoma's fingers threaded into his hair, Shinso stepped forward slightly, brushing his hands ever so lightly against the hoodie Monoma was wearing. His hoodie. He grabbed onto the open zipper and bunched his hands into it, pulling the other teen closer still and moving his hands up to grip the edge of the hood. 3 inches apart in height, 3 inches apart in distance. Monoma's eyes were half-lidded, and it was different to his usual amused distaste. There was something else behind those soft blue eyes that were focused on Shinsu's lips. Monoma's arms fell onto his shoulders, twisting Shinsu's hair slightly, and Shinso pulled Monoma's collar up to let go of him. Gee. Both teens jumped and pushed each other back, stumbling slightly before regaining their footing. 3 inches in height, 4 feet in distance, standing 20 feet from a spiky-haired boy who looked absolutely disgusted. Shinsu-kun? Did he steal your quirk or something? What the F was that? Kamakiri said, looking between the two in disgust. He's right though, what was that? Shinso didn't like guys, he doesn't like anyone for that matter. Absolutely not Monoma, who wore pastel boxers and laughed like a crazy little shithead and trained with first years and cooked and organized for his classmates. Not the Monoma who had been about to kiss him a few seconds ago. Was that what was happening? Shinso looked at Monoma, who was white as a sheet, and then back at Kamakiri, who was sort of red from a mix of anger and embarrassment. Come on, Shinso-kun. Don't tell me you're gay too. Shinso blinked and looked back at Monoma, who was regaining color and wringing his wrists under the kitchen counter where Kamakiri couldn't see. He'd be ready to defend himself in a few seconds. Shinso just needed to try and calm the situation. No, I'm not, he said, although at that point Shinso had no idea what he was. Kamakiri made a face. Or bye or whatever, Kamakiri said, and Shinso kind of nodded. So Monoma-kun was totally taking advantage of you or something then? You just say and we'll dash. Kamakiri? Yeah. Kamakiri's eyes turned white as Shinso's control settled over him. Now he just needed to figure out what to do. You okay, Monoma? Monoma swallowed and eyed Kamakiri warily. Yeah, that word was a bit much is all. Nobody's ever. Shinso sighed and squeezed Monoma's shoulder in comfort, but the blonde just turned to look up at him. Listen, I'm sorry that I... Don't apologize. It's fine. I don't know. Yeah, totally, just I don't want you to be uncomfortable. Or anything. You don't like guys, so I'm sorry if... No, I wasn't uncomfortable, I think I don't know. They stood in silence, looking at Kamakiri as he stood completely still but no doubt raged in his mind. Shinso might have laughed if the situation was different. Look, if I hold him here long enough he'll forget that he saw all of this stuff. Maybe if you go upstairs and get ready or whatever, I'll just make him get ready and release him in class. That's like an hour away though. Are you sure you can keep him that long? Yeah, I'll be fine. Maybe go and find Kendo or Tokage, Shinso suggested, and Monoma nodded before he slipped into the elevator. Shinso watched him leave and then turned back to the puppet that was Kamakiri. Go brush your teeth. Homophobes don't get breakfast. Shinso sat silently in class all day, mind lost in thoughts of that morning. First, he had caught Monoma trying to sneak back in. Probably from Kirishima's room, which meant he spent the night. Did they both sleep in the bed? Kirishima seemed like the type to sleep on the floor for a guest, and Monoma seemed like the type to take advantage of that, but he couldn't tell for sure. He wouldn't have expected any part of the last 2 days from the version of Monoma that he saw in last year's training. After that, they talked and had tea together, and then Monoma had walked into the bathroom while Shinso was there, only wearing boxers. They had both showered, Monoma while Shinso was hiding in a bathroom stall, and Shinso with blue eyes raking over him every other second. Then Monoma took his hoodie and looked adorable in it. They had both gone down to have breakfast, and almost kissed. There he said it. They almost kissed. They probably would have if Kamakiri hadn't shown up, and Shinso wasn't sure how he felt about that. It felt nice when Monoma had his hands in his hair, or in Shinso's hands, and sure, Shinso kind of wanted him to do those things more often, but kissing? He wasn't even gay. He'd never liked anybody, much less a guy. Then again, none of the people he used to know were quite like Monoma. They would always be scared of his voice, and sure Monoma was wary in training exercises, but he definitely liked the sound of his voice too much to stay silent. Also, Monoma understood that people being afraid to interact with you because of your quirk. The bell ringing kicked him out of his head, and he made his way to the cafeteria alone. As he walked in he saw 3 things. 1. Kirishima waving like a maniac across the room. 2. Monoma waving back, but more composed, a single flick of his wrist. And 3. Bakugo slapping down Kirishima's arm like it was on fire, the boy activating his quirk instinctively and leaving a dent in the corner of the table. Then he saw a 4th thing. Aways making his way to the Baku squad table, talking to them conspiratorially. He had been talking to the Deku squad table moments before, and everyone there was muttering between themselves and sneaking conspiratory glances at Monoma and himself. What the actual F-? Before he could think too hard about it, Shinso stormed through the cafeteria and put a hand on Away's shoulder. Aways, he said, tight-lipped and tense. Yeah. God, how many times were people going to fall for that before they stopped responding? Walk away. It was unspecific, but the puppet that was Aways shuffled his feet on the floor, and kept shuffling until he was in line with the booth that he could see Shiozaki's hair sticking out of. Turn left. He did. Sit down on the chair in front of you. Awaze robotically stepped forward and sat his butt on the seat, and Shinso released his control. Sorry about him. He turned back to the table as realized he was standing in front of Kirishima, Kaminari, Ashido, Bakugu, and Shiro. So was he lying? Ashido leant forward and asked, and Kirishima tried to shush her. Shinso winced. What did he say exactly? He said that Monoma is gay and did something to you? He didn't finish his sentence. What was he supposed to say to that? Clearly he didn't keep hold of Kamakiri for long enough, and he told Awaze, and now he's going around saying that Monoma was RPST or something. He's going to have to go around and clear that up, but first. He's just AD-. Monoma hasn't done anything wrong. Like, ever. He's just trying to exist, and some of the people in our class seem to hate that. Bakugu scoffed, muttered something to Kirishima, and left the cafeteria. Kirishima sighed, and Shinso swiveled to look at him. Hey, Monoma talked to you yesterday, right? After we scared you out of the window. What was he saying? Kirishima's eyes darted between Shinso and his friends. It's not my business to talk about. Monoma didn't want all of this to come out in the first place. It would be unmanly to say anything. Yeah, well, I kind of have to say something if Awaze is going around telling people that Monoma is a RPST. Ashido spat out her drink and Shiro's eyes widened, flicking over to look at Kaminari. You too, Fed? Oh my god, that's Dash. No, don't go saying that. We. Shinso rolled his eyes and put his face in his hands. Unimportant. Nothing actually happened, and that's what's important here. Monoma has done nothing except exist. This is all my fault. Please don't do anything weird to him. The way you say nothing actually happened makes me think that there was definitely something that almost happened. Shinso. Ashido grinned, and Shinso groaned. Whatever. I don't even know. I need to go tell the rest of your class that Awaze is spouting bullshit before any of them get any heroic ideas. Ashido slammed her hands on the table and stood from her seat. Dude, we'll come with you. We're just sitting alone now anyways. Bakken is off playing music with Kyuka and Tokoyami now anyway. Kaminari sniffed. I'm not allowed to join their emo band. Shiro grinned and the three boys stood and filed out of their seats. There are only two other tables, affectionately named Deku's Sheets and Extras by Bakken. Awaze only talked to us and Midoriya's table, so we only have to go there. Shinso nodded, and the five of them strolled across the walkways to Midoriya, Yuruka, Hida, Azui, Todoroki, and Yaoyorozu. Hi guys, I just Dash. Shinsu-kun. Are you okay? What did Monoma do to you? Oh, I hope you're alright. Yuruka began rambling, shuffling around and trying to squeeze out behind the row of chairs. Monoma didn't do anything. Stop listening to what Awaze says, he's just a homophobe. Yuruka's eyes widened, as did Midoriya's, and Todoroki drew his lips into a thin line, which was probably the biggest reaction to anything that he'd ever given. So you're saying that you're together or something? Yuruka asked carefully, and Shinso literally face-bombed. No. Kamakiri saw something that literally wasn't anything and jumped to conclusions because he's a dumbass, then went and told his little homophobe crew. Monoma didn't do anything, I didn't do anything, nobody has done anything wrong except for the people over there who seem determined to make everyone hate Monoma. He pointed over at the table that Tsuburaba, Shiozaki, Awaze and Kamakiri were sitting at. Midoriya stopped stuttering, took a breath, and nodded slowly. Thank you for clearing that up for us, Shinsu-kun. The others nodded uncomfortably, and Shinso nodded once and walked back to the Baku squad table, tugging at his hair. Ugh, I regret all of my life choices, he groaned, as the scraping of chairs indicated that the others had followed. Same, either Kaminari or Shiro said. Shinso couldn't really tell. But more importantly, Shinsu-kun, what is this thing that almost but didn't happen? Ashido prompted, raising her eyebrows suggestively. Oh my god, Ashido. You, call me Mina. Okay, Mina, it was really nothing. I feel like you're definitely underselling it, Shinso. Shinso groaned and propped his head up on his palm. Fine. But you can't go spreading rumors, because I don't even really know what it was. Ashido nodded furiously, and then elbowed Shiro next to her so that they were both nodding, and then Kaminari joined in too, and Kirishima just laughed and nodded once. I think we almost kissed. Ashido erupted into a squeal that could rival the volume of the school bell, and everyone at the table flinched away. Shinso, that's totally a big thing. So, do you like him? She leant forward and stage whispered to him, and he huffed. No. Are you asking me? No, I don't know. Maybe. Kirishima cleared his throat and smiled his sharkish grin. How about you tell us what you like about him, or how different things that he does make you feel, and we'll decide for you if it sounds like you like him. Gross, but whatever. Ashido was practically vibrating in excitement, and Kaminari looked defeated. But what do I start with? Tell us what made you want to talk to him. Shinso scoffed. I never wanted to talk to him, not originally. He seemed kinda interesting, I guess, in a weirdly overconfident, insane, snarky kind of way. I think when I first wanted to talk to him, it was in the morning of orientation, where he used Kendo-san's quirk to help her rearrange the desks to put my one in there. Because I didn't think he'd be the type to do that, you know? If anything, I would have thought he would sit at one of the desks to make her life more difficult, but he just helped her and then waved off her thank you. The people at the table hummed, as if they too didn't think Monoma was capable of casual selfless actions, and Shinso continued. And then at orientation these first years came up to him and started basically fangirling over him, and I expected him to just let it go to his head and start boasting, but he was nice to them, and he supported them and offered to train with them, which I think is incredible because since when would Monoma-kun act so respectful to somebody? Shiro laughed at that, and Ashido drummed her fingers on the table. Is that why he got so upset that we missed orientation? And when Bakken insulted the other students, that's why he looked like he wanted to choke him out. That's kind of sweet actually, Ashido mused, and Shinso nodded in agreement. Really the entirety of my first day there, he was just really nice to literally everybody. He and Kendo helped me carry my bags to my dorm. He came and asked me to have breakfast with them, and then when I slammed the door in his face he came and left food at my door anyway. I think that's when I decided he was interesting because he has layers, apparently, and he would be so much better off if he was that nice to everyone, but he isn't, so I wanted to find out why. Okay, and you had training the next day, right? What did you think of him then? Kirishima prompted, and Shinso sighed. He was really great actually. He and Tokage came up with this plan and they completely destroyed me in under a minute. And then at the end I fed up with my capture scarf and got us all tangled up and he had to basically grope my butt to get dash. What? Ashido screeched, and Shinsu's eyes went wide. He'd honestly forgotten he wasn't just recapping you himself. Because I keep my knife in my back pocket, which is for, cutting the scarf in case it gets caught, but my hands were all wrapped up and we were on the floor so he had to get it and dash. Let me get this straight. You and Monoma-kun were tied up together, lying on the floor of an arena somewhere, and he had his hands on your butt, Ashido recounted, getting closer to him with each word. Yeah. Oh my god. She squealed, and Kirishima shushed her. And I just kind of lay on the floor for a solid 20 seconds after while he just got up and walked away like it was nothing, and I don't understand how he keeps getting the jump on me. So you were rendered basically immobile because he grabbed something out of your back pocket, but you still don't think you like him. I don't. I've never liked anyone before. I probably just want to be friends with him and I'm getting things all messed up. Okay, so, do you like talking to him? Yeah, I guess. He seems like he isn't afraid of my quirk, he just talks and it's really easy to have a conversation with him because he seems to just be unfazed by every single topic. Really just being silent near him is peaceful and makes me happy, Shinso reflected, and Kirishima could see Ashido physically refraining herself from yelling, "It's love," like she had done to Yururika. Kirishima pouted to himself and recalled what Monoma had told him when he asked how he would know he liked someone. He thinks they're interesting? Being near them makes him happy? He likes to talk to them? He thinks they're amazing and manly? He wants to help them? Undetermined. He likes to look at them? Undetermined. He likes to touch them? Undetermined. So, Monoma-kun is pretty upset right now with all this stuff. How do you feel about that? Kirishima slyly, or at least, he thought it was pretty sly push to get the answers to his checklist, and Shinso obliged obliviously. I feel like shit. It's all my fault, and I want to fix it because nobody deserves to feel that way, but I don't know what to do. Check to that one too. Now come the more uncomfortable questions. Kirishima was gearing himself up to ask the "do you think he's hot?" question, when Ishido burst back into the conversation. So, you think he's hot? She leant forward and wiggled her eyebrows at him, and Shinso physically recoiled from the question. What? Mina, Siro warned, and she waved him off. 'Cause I do. If he wasn't so insane all the time, he'd be a total smoke show. Have you seen his hero costume? He looks amazing in a suit. Total pretty rich boy. His eyes are super nice and his hair looks super soft too. Kinda like Todoroki-kun, but like, even better almost because he's not a dense brick wall, kinda. Ishido said, and while it just sounded like rambling to Kirishima, it was apparently the right thing to say because Shinso relaxed slightly. Yeah, I guess he does have that kind of air to him, doesn't he? And he is super fit. This morning he walked into the bathroom in just his boxers and I kinda died a bit on the inside. Ishido gasped and slapped him on the arm. Dude, you're so lucky. It's such a shame, all the prettiest guys are into messy-haired determined dorks that are completely oblivious to them. She sighed, and then grinned at Shinso as it dawned on him. Wait, you're saying you think Monoma is into me? Also, what's that other example? Todoroki and... Shinso scrolled through his mental checklist of students, and his eyes went wide when it dawned on him. Midoriya. Oh yeah, okay, I totally see that one. Ishido slammed her hand on the table again and stood up from her seat. See, I told you guys, everyone sees it except Izuku-kun. Izuku-kun? That's cute. Yeah, all the girls call him that except Ochako, of course. He's just such a sweetheart. Shinso was glad for the topic change and almost got away with it, but Kirishima decided to speak up. So just to clarify, you do think Monoma is hot? Kirishima said, and Shinso mentally cursed him. Yeah, although we've kind of established that everyone thinks that, right? There is a solid, yup. From Ishido, a tentative yeah from Kirishima, and murmurs from Kaminari and Siro, and then Kirishima asked his final question. Okay, finally, do you like touching him? Like when he brushes against you or something, what does it feel like to you? I don't know. Monoma seems like a very physical contact person with his friends. He told me that apparently people were scared to be close to him because of his quirk, so he likes being able to touch people and be near them without them freaking out. Ishido, Ed at the backstory, and Shinso continued. But I mean there have been a couple of times where he's touched my hair and that feels nice, like it's been in the morning when it's flat and he runs his hand through it. I kinda want him to do that more often. Ishido, Ed again, louder this time, and Shinso smiled slightly at her. Kirishima looked like he was counting something on his fingers, and then nodded resolutely. Yup, you definitely like him. The redhead said matter-of-factly, and Ishido nodded along. Oh, 100% dude, it was obvious from the second you started talking about him. Really? Shinso groaned into his hands, and he felt a delicate hand pat him on the shoulder. It's okay, Shinso. It's totally normal. You've got your first crush. And by the looks of it, he likes you back. Shinso peeked out of the gap in his fingers just in time to see Ishido's face light up. Tell you what, we're throwing a party for Bakken's birthday next weekend. It's actually a couple of weeks away, but it's also doubling as a back-to-school party, and Bakken said he doesn't want it on his actual birthday anyway. You should bring everyone. Then you can get your man. Shinso thought back to when he had lunch with his classmates yesterday, and they had mentioned doing something for Hatsum's birthday that weekend. I don't know if any of them will. A lot of people in 2B still don't like your class, and it's Hatsum's birthday that weekend too. No offense, but they would probably kill your entire class for Hatsum if she asked for it. She's basically an honorary Class B student. The others hummed in thought. Well, we can have a back-to-school party this weekend then. Saturday night, in the 2A dorms, and everyone is invited. That way it won't intrude on anyone's birthday plans. Shinso nodded at that. Sure, but you'll have to spread the word. I don't like parties, And also most of my class isn't speaking to me right now. Ashido winked and rested her elbow on his shoulder. He was almost a foot taller than she was, so her arm was pretty much straight up in the air, and it was definitely more comical than the relaxed look she had been going for. Don't worry about it, Tosi, I'm a professional at this sort of thing. The bell rang and they all simultaneously whipped out their schedules. Hey, we have hero practice in 7th, we'll see you then, right? Shiro pointed out, and Shinso nodded. But right now I have classical Japanese, so I've gotta go. He speed-walked to his classroom, ever wary of Ida and his ability to just know when someone was running in the halls, and then he sat down in his seat and fixed his gaze on a random point out of the window. Shinso got called on a few times and barely managed to scrape his way into an acceptable answer each time, rewording what he said slightly each time the teacher commented to make it fit the topic, and it kind of almost worked. Finally, it was their last class of the day, hero practice. Shinso stayed behind only a few seconds longer than the rest of the class, but when he walked into the change room he could feel the tension. Minoma walked in with his costume case, took one look around, and then turned on his heel and walked straight back out the door. One of the guys scoffed, and Shinso picked up his costume and followed the blonde out of the room. Minoma weaved through the school and slipped into the bathroom, locking himself in a stall. Shinso changed in his own stall, and he had just done up his suit when he heard faint sniffling from the other side of the wall. Shinso stumbled out of his own stall and waited, hearing the lock click and looking up when Minoma stepped out. He was mostly dressed, his suit jacket undone and tie hanging untied around his neck, but his face was slightly pink and blotchy before he turned away from Shinso and sniffed quietly, and Shinsu's heart shattered. Minoma! Shinso wanted to help. He wanted to make the blonde feel better, distract him or comfort him or fix all this shit that he was dealing with, but he didn't even know where to begin. I just want someone to remove me from the stressful situation and relax with me until I'm ready to focus again. Shinso recalled Minoma saying the day before. He couldn't exactly remove him from this, it's happening all around him, and he couldn't really take any time because they were no doubt already expected at training. Like when some just lets me lie on them and mess with my hair. Minoma was still facing away from Shinso, rubbing at his face almost angrily, and Shinso did the only thing that he thought could possibly help. His feet stumbled forward slightly and he crashed into Minoma, wrapping his arms around the blonde and holding him firmly to his chest. Minoma tensed for a moment and then shifted slightly, and Shinso loosened his grip just enough so that Minoma could turn around. The blonde hung his arms loosely around Shinsu's waist and rested his head against his shoulder, sighing gently. Shinso could feel Minoma's hair tickling his neck, and he tightened his arms around the blonde's back. I'm so sorry. I wish I could do something to fix this, and I wish I could just take you away from all of this stuff and distract you until you feel better. I think I am going to do that, actually. The second this class finishes, we're going back to the dorms, changing, and spending the rest of the day at one of the little on-campus cafe places. Shinso rambled into Minoma's ear, and the blonde sighed. Yeah, okay. Minoma moved his arms up over Shinsu's shoulders and threaded his fingers into purple locks, and Shinso got flashbacks to that morning when they had been in this exact position and had been about to. We should probably go to class, Minoma murmured as he looked into Shinsu's lavender eyes, and the taller boy hummed. Yeah. They pulled apart and Shinso moved his arms from Minoma's waist to his tie, tying it quickly as Minoma buttoned his jacket, and then the two of them jogged down to the training area. Nice of you to join us. Oh, Shinso knew that tone all too well. They rounded the corner and come face to face with a group of 39 students and 2 teachers, one with dark hair and darker under eyes that rivaled Shinsu's own. We apologize, Eraserhead. I had to change in the bathroom and Shinsu-kun came to get me. Minoma said, and the students started murmuring. Ashido flashed him a massive grin and Shinso had to refrain from rolling his eyes at her. Very well. Get over here, you're lucky you didn't miss what we are doing today. The two boys shuffled awkwardly into the group, and Minoma was immediately swallowed up by his protection squad. He was surrounded completely by Tetsu, Tokage, who kept giving Shinso dirty looks. Kendo, Kodai, and Kaibara, with the apparent new admissions Bondo, Komori, Shouda, and Yanagi. Today you will be facing off in 1v1 matches against each other. in preparation for the final round of the sports festival later this semester. We will draw lots to see who goes up against who. Everyone will fight at the same time. You'll probably do 4 or 5 rounds as this is quite a long lesson. Okay, simple enough. 1 versus 1, that's always going to be a weak point for Shinso. His opponent will always know they're fighting him. He won't be able to use someone else's voice to trick them into speaking. He has to resort to harsh words and psychological tricks to make them say something. By the way Monoma was fidgeting next to him, it wasn't a strong suit for him either. Of course it wasn't. Monoma needs to touch his opponent, and without someone else to take a quirk from, many of these students are able to throw him out of the ring before he can lay a hand on them. Sensei. I was just wondering, there are 41 students here now, what will the last person do if they can't fight another student? Midoriya said, and Aizawa smiled that small, sadistic smile at him. The 41st student, whoever isn't paired up in each round, will fight one of us. He said it in a flat, bored tone, which kind of put a damper on the reveal, but for Shinso it was no less worrying. None of the lots had been drawn yet, nothing was decided, and everyone statistically had an even chance of facing a teacher. But Shinso knew, he could feel it in his bones, he would end up being one of those students, and he would be put up against his mentor. Based on the way Aizawa was staring holes through his skull, he could feel the same thing. It just kept getting worse, huh? Somehow, as Shinso looked out at the students that were fidgeting nervously at the idea of fighting one of their teachers, he was actually looking forward to that party on Saturday night.